起花。
中文一频道，中文一频道。中文一频道。
幸好它里面有纠正。
好。
谢谢大家光临，感谢各位参加，也感谢几位嘉宾。我们现在开始这个香山论坛平行分组会的第一组的讨论。I will talk in Chinese to start with, and in the middle we'll see.
我先说一会儿中文，然后呢到了中间。
第一组的这个讨论的题目是东盟与亚太地区安全框架。那么谈到这个，谈到我稍微等2分钟啊，等一下把那个耳机带上。Are you okay with the earphone? Okay, are you okay? English one, one or two? Two English, two. Okay. Right, okay. 我们这一组第一组讨论的题目是东盟与亚太地区安全架构。谈到东盟主导的地区安全架构，最早成型的应该是1994年的这个东盟地区论坛 AIF。那么成立论坛当时94年这个达成共识是一个晚宴的场合，当时参加的有东盟、中国，还有这个地区的主要国家的外长。我当时也参加了哈，这个作为陪同，我还清楚地记得这曾经是一场非常激烈的辩论，因为那个时候嘛，冷战刚刚结束，地区国家之间在安全问题上的信任度还是比较低的，所以这些国家外长能坐在一起讨论安全问题，这本身就是一个历史性的一个突破。那么当时呢，就是之所以能达成共识，其实当时分歧还是很大的哈。之所以能达成共识呢，一个这个凝聚大家的一个指导思想，就是各国都希望有一个和平的环境，能来更好的发展经济。那么经过30年之后呢，这个地区形势发生了很大的变化。东盟地区论坛呢，也从外长的会挪到了国防部长之间，而且后来国防部长这个也谈得越来越深，这个地区的信任度是持续的提升。那么这个地区的经济形势也是一直比较好，不仅是中国实现了快速发展，而且东盟国家都实现了这个比较好的发展。整个东盟国家的 GDP 增长在这30年当中是7.6倍，全球增长是3倍，所以东盟国家的这个增长是2倍于这个全球增长的。那么我觉得我们最需要重视、珍惜和回顾的呢，就是我们这个地区呢保持了长期的和平，这个各国人民呢免于遭受战争啊、动荡的这个磨难。那么这个所有的国家可以说在这个地区都可以专心致志的发展经济、改善生活。我对这个印象还是比较深的。我1992年的时候参加柬埔寨的维和，在那儿呢就是看到了这个国家战争之后满目疮痍，尤其你看到那些流离失所的孩子，甚至是残疾的孩子，确实特别令人心痛。那么之后，柬埔寨和平之后的20年间，我多次回到金边，看到人们的精神面貌焕然一新，看到这个国家的繁荣和富有活力，确实是非常感动的。所以呢，我们确实要充分地认识到，这个地区的和平发展、繁荣，经济的成长呢，得益于我们的一个和平的环境。现在呢，亚太地区的这个场景呢也在发生变化，那么出现一些新的问题，地缘政治、大国竞争被引入我们这个地区，军事安全集团化的风险呢再次出现，所以问题就是我们还能不能守住我们的初心？那么东盟能不能继续维护这个地区长期和平稳定，在这个过程当中继续发挥中坚作用？中国的态度是明确的，我们承诺继续支持东盟的中心作用 centrality 也愿意为促进地区团结合作、实现可持续的安全做出我们自己的贡献。所以呢，我们今天这个话题呢，是一个既乐观，但是又有这个沉重的这个责任感的一个话题。我们邀请到了来自印尼、新加坡、菲律宾、马来西亚和中国的5位资深学者，希望大家呢围绕这个2个方面的问题发表意见。一个呢就是 东盟主导的这个区域安全架构的作用和现在面临哪些挑战，哪些这个内外挑战。第二是东盟呢，各位怎么看东盟如何继续在这个地区这个发挥更大的作用？所以我们下面开始邀请各位嘉宾发言。第一位呢是这个第一位是来自印度尼西亚的战略与国际问题研究中心高级研究员和兼这个联合创始人瓦南迪先生。Mr. Yusuf Wanandi, please.
Thank you.
谢谢。
I'm very glad to be here, and I would like to thank first
能够参加今天下午的讨论，感谢主办方呢今天给我这么一个机会发言。我在这里首先呢给大家介绍一下目前我们东盟的情况是怎么样的，我们对未来的看法，以及我们面临的一些问题。在我们
What is the current state of ASEAN, and what can be the future of ASEAN-led mechanism that the ASEAN and East Asian Summit? The meeting that we have held was reflective on the divergence and convergence between how ASEAN members perceive both relevance and potential of ASEAN, and what can be done within different parameters.
Well, great powers rivalry which takes place in multi-dimensional fronts is an inevitable reality that ASEAN and its members face, must face.
The most fundamental problem lies in the fact that ASEAN is not united in dealing with such structural challenges. The member states differ on how ASEAN can and should respond to such challenges. And here we have two views in looking at the fundamental issue of ASEAN. The first view argues that ASEAN's lack of cohesiveness and unity is now extremely weak and can be seen from the unresolved Myanmar problem, also of individual decisions of some members to force a closer alignment with certain great powers, such as the Philippines to the United States or Cambodia, and now CHANG at the expense of a regional principle of neutrality. Only after the problem of unity is solved, then ASEAN can undertake the next steps and regain its previous convening role to help construct stable and peaceful regional architecture. The second view, alternatively, portrays that for ASEAN to have an absolute unity, especially if it is meant to be unanimity, is an endless, if not impossible task, since the region can never have a strategic convergence. It is undeniable that ASEAN member states have significant difference of geopolitical outlook in the region, at least between maritime and mainland Southeast Asia. Hence, there is a limit as to what extent the member states can agree to a common position, and will only so on many issues to come. More importantly, it is hard to see how 10 member states with different political systems and geopolitical outlook can agree on how ASEAN can pursue its institutional reform to be able to fix its unity problem. Thus, there will be differences in the way the region sees both its accomplishments and limitations so far. The ASEAN Plus 3, or APT, was established back in 1997 as a response to Asian financial crisis, where a deeper East Asian regional cooperation has been perceived as a way to prevent such crisis to reoccur. Thus, its original nature is to have a functional cooperation among ASEAN and the ASEAN powers, Asian powers. The focus of the cooperation is largely on economic cooperation, on how to strengthen regional financial system and to be able to reform international financial architecture in the future. So ASEAN Plus 3 offer a huge potential for ASEAN to regain its centrality and to strengthen itself in mitigating geopolitical rivalries. APT, under its ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic Research Office, or UMRO, has managed to present various information and resources related to the economic situation in the region, as well as to improve macroeconomic stability and to provide financial safety net to its members under the Chiang Mai Initiative multilateral. However, where the UMRO can help to foster an effective and functioning Chiang Mai Initiative in the future, of course, is still largely a question due to the lack of political will among the regional leaders. From the result of recent 27th ASEAN Plus 3 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting in early May 2024, there was a call from UMRO to not only assess macroeconomic situations, but more importantly, to also provide timely analysis on emerging risks and challenges. Furthermore, there are other progressive initiatives under APT, such as the ASEAN Plus 3 Emergency Rice Reserve, established in 2011. This is a regional cooperation which aims to strengthen food security in the region. Thus, functional cooperation on food and energy supply chain, sustainable development, and public health are the areas where APT could be moved with the necessary political will of the ASEAN dialogue partners. Programs under APT are usually carried out with greater success since they involve more participation from ASEAN partners in terms of resources and know-how. The nature of cooperation in the APT program also allow ASEAN members and dialogue partners to align their individual interests for common objectives. Thus, ideally, the APT spirit of regionalism can also be extended from the economic to security dimensions, although it remains unclear whether such aspiration can be fulfilled in the near future. As for the East Asian Summit or EAS, the initiative came from the recommendation of the East Asian Fishing Group. This was comprised of intellectuals from ASEAN Plus 3 countries. Named as the East Asian Fishing Group report, it recommended the creation of the East Asian Free Trade Area, East Asia Investment Network, Information Network, regional funding. This is the problem when you are, analphabet and all the technical things now. So the currency coordination and the most important one, the East Asian Summit, which is a leaders-led forum where ASEAN is being put at the center. On EAS, the group agrees that its potential to become the leading platform and the venue to seek common denominator, if not consensus, has to be taken seriously. Even though EAS meetings today from most of the time started from a point of disagreement rather than from a spirit to find convergence of difference of views among the different member states. EAS members tend to attend the meeting with procedural concerns, believing that making statements and attending talk shops are what make their membership count. In this context, ASEAN is still having institutional impediments to drive the platform to discuss harder and more sensitive political and strategic issues. The initiative to intensify the collaboration among the EAS ambassadors based in Jakarta has to be appreciated, although this is certainly not enough to further push for deepening engagement among EAS members. EAS is a leaders level mechanism where interaction should be built among the key senior officials of the member. Hence, the establishment of an ASEAN or an EAS secretariat is an urgent need to foster coherent work within EAS mechanism. On the economic area, the Track 1 engagement has been equipped with well-established research units such as the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia or AREA, which produces various ideas to be discussed by the officials. However, there is an urgent need to amplify various recommendations derived from the work of AREA to the policymakers and other interested stakeholders to induce policy change. One more minute, I hope. Nonetheless, as the nexus between economic and security issues is increasingly more intensified, as exemplified through the great powers rivalries, there is an urgency for AREA to expand its work beyond economic research and entering into examining the security risks and challenges, as well as to participation of the most important think tanks of ASEAN to have AREA to also delve into strategic issues. This is extremely crucial to sustain EAS in becoming an effective platform for confidence-building measures among competing states in the region. Thank you.
谢谢 ，Thank you， 谢谢。瓦南迪先生对东盟的作用还是有一个很清醒的认识的哈，觉得这个东盟的内部团结和外部都面临着不同挑战。作为这个10个政治制度不同，地缘的这个视野和利益都不同的这个一个组织哈，如何更好的达成一致，如何更好的发挥作用，提出一些问题。但是我觉得最终瓦南迪还是很乐观的，回顾了整个这一段时间东盟作用的东盟的成长，还是希望东盟这些机构呢能够克服困难，尤其是国别的利益要服从这个大的整体的利益，能够切实在这个动荡的世界呢进一步发挥这个核心作用。谢谢瓦南迪。我们下面邀请新加坡的这个优索福伊沙东南亚研究所的所长蔡成国先生发言。Mr. Choi, please.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Let me first start by thanking the organizers of the 11th Beijing Shenzhen Forum for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be able to speak. I'm speaking rather fast because I have only 10 minutes, so I will be going through a few key points. I'm going to zoom out from where Bapak Yusof Wanandi has started his discussion by looking at the bigger picture. So let me briefly try to address this. I want to try to answer 3 questions. So first, what are the Asia-Pacific region's foremost challenges? I think that the challenges that face the Asia-Pacific, we really have to see it as a subset of what the whole world is facing. And there are at least 3, I would say, fairly major issues that face the world today. Number 1 is that the trust between communities, populations, and their governments has actually eroded over the last 15 to 20 years. You can see this very clearly in some of the various indicators and surveys. For example, the Edelman Trust Barometer, especially in the year 2012, it has shown a very marked drop in the trust of people in government. And same also the drop of trust between the people and businesses. And the reason for that, it actually has its roots in the global financial crisis. While the global financial crisis was tackled in a way that was successful, but it was at the expense of the people. So businesses was, in that sense, salvaged. Governments came out with new regulations, but I think in the process, the middle class especially lost their trust in government. The second major thing that has happened, I think we are all familiar with it, is with us every day is social media. So social media has really changed the way people communicate, and it has actually divided rather than united the world. The third thing, I think, which I want to just say has shaken the world, actually is the rise of China. So in the last 20 years, China has actually risen from a time when it was just small single-digit part of the whole world GDP to now something like 17% the world GDP. So it's grown just in the last 20 over years by 10 times. And that has really changed the economic order. So these things actually provide the backdrop. So what is the issue that Asia Pacific should be most concerned about, or is most concerned about, is basically whether in this rise of China, the US and China relationship can remain stable, and it can actually go through this period of competition and yet not cause any issue that would, in that sense, cause the trajectory of the world to become more in conflict. The US has pivoted towards the Asia Pacific because it perceives these challenges from China. But on the other hand, I think China is also concerned about the way that the US is pivoting, and so it has responded in its own way as well. What I would say is that the region itself, in the meantime, while there is both the US and China active in the region, it is actually rather concerned about the outsized influence that China has in the region. And this is actually validated by the survey results that my institute actually does. At the same time, I think the US is always seen as a less, perhaps a rather distant, if benign power, and whether or not it is going to be always around, that has always been a question over the last 50 years, and it remains a question, especially this year with the elections that are taking place. So second question I'd like to quickly run through is, what are the needs and priorities of the region, in this case Southeast Asia? I would say that Southeast Asia is very much economically focused. It has enjoyed the last 20 years of economic growth that has placed the region actually as the fastest growing region in the world. It's the first time that it's in that kind of position, and it would like to stay there. This is a period when the region does not have conflict. It's actually quite rare because the region has faced conflict up to the time of the Vietnam War, and also the time when Cambodia was being occupied. So this is a rare period of time when they could focus on economics, and it would like this to carry on going forward. Given the contrast between US and China, what Southeast Asia needs is really to have good relations with both. So I think with China, it has a mutually beneficial relationship that is also resilient. It is the biggest trading partner with the region. It is needed because what China needs to import, Southeast Asia has. What China would like to link up with in terms of global value chains, Southeast Asia has. So there's a mutually beneficial relationship. And China is also very active in investments, like for example to the BRI. Although the BRI is now being somewhat, shall we say, contested by other programs, but BRI is still unique because it offers the possibility for certain investments that would otherwise not be available. So China is needed for that sense. On the other hand, US is also needed by the region because it's an important security partner, and it's still the biggest investor in the region. The US, by far, in terms of stock, is still a major economic force. It's kind of underrated because it's less visible, but actually it is very significant. So going forward, of course, as the region looks at the US, it also has some concerns. The way that the US is responding, for example, with high technology controls over exports into China, that actually causes problems for Southeast Asia. And so it is an uncertainty that the relationship with the US has kind of sprung up. So what are the key institutions going forward? And this is the last question I give some points on. I agree with Pak Yusuf that ASEAN is still the key institution in the evolving architecture of the region. Things are going to change. The ARF, the EAS, all these would have to tweak going forward because the environment is different. But I think what is clear is that ASEAN itself is irreplaceable. Whatever one may say now about the friction that are actually existing, for example, over Myanmar, also on different approaches towards different issues, or different leanings of different members of ASEAN, ASEAN is just still irreplaceable as an institution that gives the region an identity in itself, and I think this is very much recognized by the ASEAN community itself. We see this in our survey results. When we conducted a survey this year, ASEAN is beginning to look more towards itself rather than external major powers in terms of the championing of free trade, as well as in terms of championing the rules-based order, because it sees that it has to move and assert in this way out itself. That is not to say that the other major powers are not welcome, but that there's a certain sense in which ASEAN sees itself as indispensable. And this is, of course, being recognized too by those outside partners as well. So let me give you my last point, which is really to say that both US and China have something to contribute to Southeast Asia, and that is very much recognized. But at the same time, it has to work to assuage certain fears. And the second point is it has to pay attention to the region's interests for its own sake. Because in the midst of this competition between the US and China, often the lens through which the US and China look at the region tend to be also tinted by the perceptions of how US or China could be a party in this issue that is at stake. And I can give some further examples later on, but maybe that can come forward in the Q&A. Yeah, Madam.
好，谢谢。这个蔡先生讲了亚太地区的形势当中的变化，很重要的一点就是它是整个世界变化当中的一部分，受到世界变化的影响。另外呢，就是他谈到了亚太面临的一些挑战，比如说信任指数下降，包括国内人民对企业、对政府的信任，国与国之间的信任，社交媒体的影响。但更重要的一点，他认为这个中国的崛起对世界带来的冲击，也是使这个地区的经济秩序发生改变。那么如何这个稳定的度过这段时间，对东盟来讲很重要。同时他也认为这个地区长期是就是很少有这么30年吧，30多年没有发生大的冲突和战争，这也是这个地区比较难得的一个这个状态。那么对东南亚国家来讲，中国和美国都很重要，都需要东南亚希望这个从这个对美关系和对中国关系当中获取益处。所以呢，就是我觉得他讲的这一点对我还是挺有启发的。就是东盟国家因为这个外部环境的变化，东盟国家从这个自知走向自觉更加这个对自身的作用更加这个有更强的自我这个认识。那么还有一点，他给美国和中国提的建议，就是希望这两个国家在竞争的过程当中也要关心东南亚地区自身的，就是这个地区的利益，不是说光是中美之间的利益。我觉得他这些角度对我们这个看问题还是很有启发的。他还有一些想法，待会儿在答问期间吧，可以再进一步阐释。我们下面邀请菲律宾新时代大学国际关系学院院长塔本达博士，Mr. Carlos。 Abundance.
Thank you very much, Madam Queen. I would like to present what I believe is an alternative view of the South China Sea conflict. There is an emerging perspective within a small circle of academics in the Philippines on how to view the South China conflict. This involves adopting a different lens, one that rejects looking at the situation from a territorial perspective, but looking at the situation from a relational perspective. In a territorial perspective, boundaries are clearly demarcated. This is the consequence of the adoption of the Westphalian point of view, which is a source of conflict and contestation among the different actors coming from within and outside the region. In a relational concept, boundaries are not settled, but they are fluid and therefore takes into consideration the natural and traditional actions, motions and directions adopted by people, and the biological and non-biological beings present in the area. There is a need to look at the South China Sea through a perspective that highlights its social, economic, scientific, ecological, and shared historical significance. The South China Sea should not be an arena of superpower rivalry, where littoral states such as the Philippines must choose between the superpowers, one of whom does not really belong in the neighborhood. The South China Sea must be viewed as a common good to be shared and preserved by those in the neighborhood and by those who pass through it. The emphasis is on the term common good. The sea is a very rich biodiversity area that needs joint protection and preservation. The fingerlings that spawn in the rich coasts of the Philippines do not regard the political boundaries when they go to the center of the sea and to areas within the coasts of China and Vietnam. The plastic and garbage materials from any among the countries within the region do not respect political boundaries when they percolate and finally settle in the coastline of a country. The typhoons generated in the east that pass through the Philippines do not stop there, but proceed to the rest of the region, wreaking immeasurable damages to lives and properties. It is imperative for different countries to recognize the need to cooperate and not quarrel in performing their related responsibilities as stewards of the sea. UNCLOS signatories are legally obliged to jointly manage their shared resources, a great portion of which had already been damaged by recent activities such as island building. Dialogues among the concerned states must continue. Cooperation must be enhanced and necessary information must be shared. Fishermen and ordinary people must be allowed to carry on their normal and historical, legal, economic activities. Cooperation, not posturing among law enforcement agencies must be encouraged. ASEAN as an organization must lead in this. For start, countries that have a direct stake in the South China Sea and which are in the region must promote the dialogues. There is need to recognize the importance of transparent communication in the quest for predictability and reduced tension. Again, ASEAN should take the lead with China, who is the biggest actor in the neighborhood. How to achieve this should be the major leading objective of the organization. We may not be able to achieve that now, but the process should begin now. As it is, there seems to be strong obstacles in sharing scientific data necessary to protect the shared environment. We must let the members of the scientific community come together to jointly conduct and share data on the protection of marine resources for everyone. Fish stocks in the area have gone down to 95% since the 1950s. The island building spree of some state actors has contributed further to this deterioration. A notable contribution has already been made by a group of scientists supported by the Philippine government. They launched studies on the status of tuna species in the area. Follow-up studies are now being made. This demonstrates that rival states can forget their differences to work on a common good. This may be a deeply constructivist view, but it is very possible that tensions can be reduced and solutions to common issues can be achieved. It has been done in the region long before the Western colonizers came, and it is still being done, but with some challenges because of quote-unquote sovereignty concerns. Pre-colonial Southeast Asian polities seldom committed their exact borders to papers and maps. They never felt the political need to do so. The inhabitants of border zones where the limits of two or more polities commingle have learned to live in harmonious coexistence with the occasional neighborly spats. Such situation persists even to this day in the maritime south of the Philippines with Indonesia and Malaysia, and in the mountainous regions of Thailand, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Throughout the centuries, Chinese traders had peacefully plied the sea without any major tension. The state of historical and traditional relations among these countries in the region must be highlighted and serve as best practices that could be expanded within the whole area. And now we go to the discussions of a shared future, which I think denotes the aspect of shared stewardship of this common resource. The principle of sharing is inherent to the Filipino culture. We have the notion of caring for the kapwa, or the other people. This refers to family, relatives, friends, neighbors, human beings other than himself. This notion, I believe, fits into the Chinese narrative of sharing with others. But here is the catch. We need to come up with a common definition of the word sharing. Is it a sharing among equals, or is it a sharing of parties where there is a dominant actor that dictates the terms of sharing? This is what we must talk about, and hopefully come up with an agreement acceptable to all parties. In the end, all parties working in the region must explore the idea of the South China Sea as a common good, an area serving the needs of neighboring states that should not be an arena of geopolitical contest and militarization. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢塔布纳先生。他提出这个不是从领土的角度，而是从关系的角度来看这个争议、看分歧。这是一个比较有意思的角度哈。他认为从关系角度看呢，一切都是动态的。强调这个共同利益、共同保护、共同发展。可以肯定的说，中非在这个南海的争议是问题上分歧是看法是分歧比较大的。但是塔布纳强调呢，就是一个就是应该这个多沟通、分享信息、共同保护资源，合作优先。另外呢，希望东盟发挥作用，能够这个促进沟通，应该东盟应该出面主动跟中国协商，这跟中国的看法应该是一致。中国也希望跟这个东盟国家吧，但是呢，这个中方提出这个双轨的路径，其实也包括这样的内容。这个看法上有不同，但是方向上还是有一致性的。他们呢强调。尤其是这个对分享，我们经常用这个分享这个词儿，英文 sharing 这个词儿的定义到底如何去定义，提出个挺有意思的想法。关于南海问题，我们待会儿还要听这个中方的吴世存先生更仔细的阐释中方的观点。我们下边先请马来西亚国防与安全研究所当代安全研究中心的副主任这个赛义的先生 Muhammad Saeed Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. Jauhal. First of all, on behalf of the Malaysian Institute of Defence and Security, MIDAS, Ministry of Defence Malaysia, we would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to speak at the Beijing International Forum 2024. It is an honor to be in a session with prominent speakers. Now, I must say that I'm big in size, but listening to Bapak Yusuf, Mr. Choi, and other speakers, I feel so tiny, so small. Because they have been my references all this while, and I'm still referring to them. Nonetheless, listening to their views is a privilege, and sharing our opinion is a great opportunity. Now, last month, ASEAN celebrated its 67th anniversary of establishment. This association has proved its robustness after going through many periods, namely the Cold War, the post-Cold War, and several economic downturns that hit the region. At one time, after 9/11, Southeast Asia was accused of being the second front of terrorism. Natural disasters have also hit the region from time to time. In parallel, the last 67 years have seen tremendous economic growth, and currently ASEAN has positioned itself as a major player in international trade. This has been mentioned many times since yesterday. It is worth mentioning that in the ASEAN region there are several hotspots, namely, of course, the South China Sea, the Sulu-Sulawesi Sea, and the Straits of Malacca, which is also a choke point for maritime trade routes. Now, of late, ASEAN is being tested on geopolitics, the emergence of unilateralism, and great power competition. It can be argued that presently ASEAN is facing dual challenges, which are traditional threats and non-traditional threats that require tactful balancing. Now, these two significant issues warrant serious attention, and one cannot turn one blind eye to any of them. Now, I wish to highlight 2 points that may enhance ASEAN and the Asia-Pacific cooperation. Point number 1 is ASEAN, through its ASEAN's Defense Ministry Meeting Plus, or ADMM Plus, which focuses more on non-traditional threats, with the establishment of its Expert Working Group, or EWG. Presently, there are 7 EWGs, namely on maritime security, counterterrorism, humanitarian assistance and disaster management, peacekeeping operations, military medicine, humanitarian mine action, and cybersecurity. One of the motivations of the EWG is, of course, to enhance regional peace and stability through defense cooperation. By nature of its establishment, EWG concentrates on non-traditional security issues that need our cooperation and push us to work together. Also, non-traditional issues would take us by surprise, especially when we are off guard. For example, terrorism, which has been relatively quiet during the pandemic period, but of late showing signs of making a comeback. There were attacks and arrests in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore recently. This year, the Beijing International Forum also has a session on terrorism as compared to last year. Therefore, readiness and counter-terrorism efforts need to be prioritized again. A pandemic is another concern in non-traditional threats. The number of deaths due to the COVID-19 was estimated at around 7 million. Now, this morning I heard someone say 15 million, so it depends on what is our reference. Now, this is still low compared to the number of deaths in World War I, which was around 15 to 20 million, and World War II, which was around 16 million. Again, it depends on which references that we are using. However, 7 million lives is not a tiny figure. Therefore, averting the next pandemic is crucial, and this presents an opportunity for ASEAN and everyone in Asia Pacific to work together. Another emerging issue will be the rapid development of AI. It's also an opportunity for us to work together. Advanced countries in Asia Pacific, China, Japan, Korea, could assist developing ASEAN countries in AI. More importantly, we could also put effort into the responsible use of AI. Without proper monitoring and control, AI could generate misinformation and perhaps disinformation as well, as we have seen lately. My point number 2 is that while we continue to draft ideas on navigating the challenges, we also need to have more options in our non-hardware approach. That being said, we need to prepare our young officers, our young people, to take the lead in the future. One day we will pass these challenges to the next generation. I've been listening to this discussion since I was 25 years old. I'm 50 already this year and soon, so we need to pass this to the next generation. Therefore, it is best that we give our young officers the early necessary exposure. EDMM conducts an initiative called the ASEAN Defense Introduction Program to promote people-to-people interactions and advocate respect for diversity equality and mutual understanding. Perhaps the big powers can collaborate and emulate this initiative, which will result in a bigger young officers network. This network will allow our young officers to get to know each other better and learn our languages, history, culture, ideology, and beliefs. We'll also give them the space to discuss among themselves and produce more innovative ideas and content. It will also address generational gaps between countries. Now, generational gaps within a country are already challenging, and between countries will give a more significant challenge. It will also provide empowerment and give more weight to the United Nations Youth, Peace and Security Program. It will also facilitate our diplomacy tools, and we may cultivate a different mindset that produce tangible outcomes in our pursuit of the best solution. Above all, the program should not only enhance the participants' knowledge, but also build friendship and trust. As the saying goes, start them young. Okay. Despite the challenges that we are facing ahead, we have shared interests and concerns, ASEAN, Asia Pacific, and the whole world. Therefore, the more we communicate, the more rational we will be with each other. To conclude, we are indeed living in a very challenging period. Therefore, let us focus more on what unites us instead of putting us into block. 谢谢。
谢谢马哈萨伊的他这个谈到东盟67周年哈，真是时间过得很快。那么这个他谈到的不光是东盟现在面临的地缘政治挑战，也提到了很多就是非传统的安全的挑战，比如说恐怖主义啊、疫情啊、人工智能啊，这个强调年轻人的这个领导力的构建。这个消除代际鸿沟啊，比如说在知识方面的交流啊，我觉得讲得很好。有一点还是他刚50岁就准备这个传递了，有点早了点哈，是不是？还是要继续奉献一段。总之吧，这个才强调这是一个充满挑战的时代，解决的出路是团结，我觉得讲得很好。下面我们是不是请这个吴世纯，华阳海洋研究中心理事长、中国南海研究院的学术委员会主席吴世纯院长发言？谢谢。
好，谢谢吴老师啊。我想围绕我们这一组的专题，亚太安全构架的这个建设，发表我的一些个人的一些思考。一个就是亚太地区安全构架的现状是什么？目前亚太地区安全构架可能从我的视角看，应该是分成两类。第一类就是刚才我们已经讨论过的东盟主导，中国参与，而且发挥积极作用的多边安全合作机制。第二类呢是美国主导的基于双边联盟关系的亚太同盟伙伴体系。那么第一类就是东盟主导的，目前有几个比较成熟的机制，刚才傅导师也说了 ，ARF 东盟地区论坛，这个刚才马来西亚这个学者阿海默德也说到了，就是东盟防长扩大会议 ADN+，瓦兰这些人提到的 ERS 东亚峰会。那么东盟主导的机制，有一些特点在我个人看来，它也可能是它的不足之处。第一点就衍生不出统一的安全机制。ARF 从90年到现在已经40年了，94年30年了，现在还没有形成一个统一的安全机制。第二呢，就是难以依靠这些机制解决自身的安全问题。刚才东盟学者讲了，现在东盟国家安全还希望美国人来提供保护。第三呢，这些机制的发育缓慢，还停留在对话阶段和信任措施构建阶段，连预防外交这个还没有做到这一步。 所以更谈不上在传统安全领域、非冲突安全领域来进行合作了。那么美国主导的这些盟友体系，主要是我把它概括几个啊，这个学术界也一直议论的所谓的543五眼联盟四国机制，五眼联盟形成于冷战时期，四国机制2017年美国倡导的印太战略，2019年奥克斯机制，再一个2是收紧双边同盟。那么美国主导的这些机制它有什么特点？一个就是以中国为假想敌这种指向，第二排他性、非包容性，第三对抗性，再一个不可持续性。我觉得可能你比如说奥克斯机制是在特朗普时期形成的，那么这个这个 QUAD 机制是在特朗普时期形成的，那么 AUKUS 机制是在拜登时期形成的。这两个机制，假设美国总统大选发生政党更替，能否可持续？我觉得还应该打一个问号，这是现状。第二呢，问题就是能否构建统一的亚太的安全机制？我的一个基本的观点是，因为现有亚太地区的各个机制，它扮演着不同的角色，涵盖多个安全对话、军事同盟、情报共享，甚至联合作战。这些机制本身体现出它的复杂性、碎片化、重叠性、对抗性、排他性的特点非常突出。所以我认为在目前在亚太地区构建一个全覆盖的统一的安全机制的时机还不成熟，主要是美国它要维持它的霸权体系，再一个中美战略对抗，中美两个大国在本地区难以相向而行，再一个东盟小马拉大车非常困难，比如说EIS 机制，那么东盟试图主导他坐在驾驶员的位置上，但是美国也试图把东盟从驾驶员的位置上挤出去，所以东盟自身的能力还是受到一定的局限。那么我想最后就是出路在哪里？我想能不能在南海地区由中国和东盟来尝试，在 COC 框架下建立一个南海地区一个新的安全机制。那么我注意到今天上午的全体大会上，越南的国防部长潘文江和新加坡的国防部长黄远红都提到了中国和东盟应该加快行为准则的磋商，给国际社会信心，南海问题地区国家有能力来解决，南海的和平地区国家有能力来维护。我想这个尝试就是大范围小切口，但是要构建中国和东盟在南海地区建立一个新的安全机制，在 COC 的框架下，因为 COC 去年已经完成了第2轮审读，那么现在正在进行第3轮审读，那么按照去年制定的时间表和新路图，有望在2027年之前完成准则的磋商。那么可否以 COC 也就是未来东帝汶正式加入东盟以后，那就是11+1这个框架。那么前提我觉得要做这件事儿，构建中国东盟南海地区的安全机制，一要搁置争议，南海问题太复杂，涉及到领土争议、海洋挂界主张，就涉及国家之多，争议岛礁数量之多，争议重叠海域面积之广，在全球范围内绝无仅有，期待在未来可预见的时间里彻底解决南海问题不可能。那么怎么办？把争议搁置起来，来谋求共同安全。第二点，去军事化。如果说在南海，我认为南海很重要的一个特点，现在是美国在南海主导的军事化， 要去美国主导的军事化。如果南海仍然面临军事化的挑战，那么在南海我们要构建一个中国和东盟这个主导的南海地区的安全机制也不可能。第三个去域外国家介入，现在不仅是美国、日本，还有其他一些国家已经纷纷开始介入南海争议，扩大他们在南海的军事存在等等啊。那么我想这个机制如果能构建起来，那么路径就是首先从危机管控开始，不要发生冲突，包括中美之间、中国尤其是现在和菲律宾之间，那么然后再过渡到信任措施，然后再过渡到预防性外交，然后再扩大到非传统安全领域的合作，再到安全领域的合作。我的结论。那么如果说我们能够成功构建 COC 框架下的南海地区安全机制，我认为这将是中国倡导的解决南海争议的双轨思路。刚才傅大师也提到了所谓的双轨思路，这就南海的和平与安全由中国和东盟来维护，南海争议由中国和有关当事国通过谈判协商的方式来解决，所以是双轨思路落实的重要步骤，也是减少南海地区冲突和对抗，有效管控海上危机，那么建设以海上合作为主要内容的基于地区共识的地区安全新秩序的博爱选择。谢谢。
谢谢吴世成老师哈，他刚才这个对这个亚太地区现存安全架构有一个很清晰的描绘，一个是东盟主导的，一个是美国主导的这个新的这一套。这个让我想起我们就是东盟地区论坛成立以后，在中国开的小组会，无果而终，讨论了从中午讨论到下午，大家飞机都赶不上。为什么呢？当时就是美国代表团就要求东盟地区论坛的定性是对美国在亚太地区的同盟体系的补充，就是要定性为是作为美国这个同盟体系的一个补充的一个机构。所以当时讨论在座的很多国家都不是这个同盟机构的成员，所以不能接受这个定性，所以当时就没有谈出一个结果。后来逐渐的这个问题就克服掉了，这个东盟地区论坛还是以东盟为主导的这个地区的一个安全架构，而不是补充。那么这些年呢，这个美国政策的调整，这个地缘政治啊、大国竞争进入这个地区以后呢，确实存在这两个安全架构未来何去何从的问题。吴老师提出的这个在 COC 的框架内建立一个新的机制，这个想法是挺好的。当然可能最大的阻力还是美国在这个地区，美国把亚太地区作为跟中国竞争的主战场，主要是要在这个地方要跟中国一争高下。那么未来可能在很大程度上，东盟的作用会受这个地缘政治这个变化的制约。从中国的角度来讲呢，还是希望东盟国家能够从地区利益出发吧，能够发挥更大的作用。这是老吴刚才谈到的这个观点。我们现在呢，时间呢我们一共90分钟哈，现在已经过了将60多分钟了，我们还有20多分钟的时间。我们现在开始大家可以提问，有什么问题提问的人请举手，另外呢可以自报家门哈，另外呢也提一下这个问题是提给谁，如果没人提我们就走了有没有？
您好，我的问题想提给Mr. Tabunda。就最近有仙冰礁是比较火的一个区域，我是来自中央广播电视总台。 我想问一下，菲律宾在新兴郊区的这一系列动作，您觉得是有助于南海和平稳定和安全吗？谢谢。刚才还有2位举手的，你们一块提了吧，一个答。这位女士，前面这个女士，
我想问的这个问题同样提给 Carlos。I'm a reporter from Beijing Daily, and I want to say that the room is very cold, but you said it's very warm to me. You mentioned that the revolving South China Sea issue not only focus on the territory matter, but also focus on the relations between China and the Philippines. So I wonder that how do you view the involvement of the non-regional country, including the United States, in the South China Sea? Do you think the involvement of the United States would impact the relations between China and the Philippines and further impact the regional peace and resolving of the South China Sea issue? Thank you very much.
谢谢。好像这2个问题都是给这个菲律宾塔本纳的。Mr. Do you want to?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
my answer will be very different to address both of the questions. You see, the problem we have now, the conflict we have now, cannot be resolved, I think, given the situation where we are in now, where all the lines are being drawn to protect its country's nationalistic interests. As long as we don't abandon our, this is really constructivist from an international relations point of view. As long as we don't abandon our paradigm of, oh, this is my territory, you should not be here, that is your territory, you stay there. As long as we don't abandon that point of view, as long as we don't abandon that perspective on looking at the South China Sea, I don't think we can reach any possible solution, because we're not really ready, each country is not really ready to give up their traditional belief that they own this territory. Why don't we look at the interests of the whole neighborhood of nations? Why don't we look at the interests of the South China Sea as a biodiversity entity, the protection of which really redounds to the greater interest of all countries in the region? As long as we see the South China Sea as an area for contestation, I don't think we can really arrive at a peaceful solution to this crisis. I'm an international relations professor, so that's a rather constructivist point of view. But I believe in the goodness of the human being that we can achieve, as long as we are ready to talk. So all that, the communication lines among the countries should be open, whether they belong to ASEAN and China, whether they belong to the neighborhood, or they belong to other countries outside of the region. Because the South China Sea is a common good. This is for the whole of humanity. That's my belief. It's not for a single country. It's for all of us. It has been there long before we were born, and it will outlast all of us. Thank you.
塔文纳先生回答，不知道你们2位是不是满意哈？就是这个可能对中方来讲，我们在结论上是一致的。但是呢，根据 DOC 呢，就是大家承诺了，不再有新的动作。从中方的角度来讲呢，我们肯定也是不能放弃我们的主权要求。所以刚才老吴提出来说，我们希望能够搁置争议，然后这个共同维护地区安全。所以从菲律宾的角度，中国人的主要的意见是从菲律宾的角度，这个采取一些新的动作，这个是一个不符合共识、不符合这个地区达成的一些基本的这个一致意见。下面看还有什么对其他这个。
And I'm a journalist of Southern Weekly, and my first question is that last year President Marcos visited China, and he said that the security of the Asia Pacific should be decided by the countries in this region, not by any country else. But during the past almost 2 years, we can see that he's definitely saying one thing and doing another. He's opening more bases to the U.S. and also agreeing the deployment of the U.S. missiles in the Philippines. So in your opinion, why did he change his attitude all of a sudden? And my second question is that some U.S. officials say that the U.S. is just using the Philippines as a tool. And how far the U.S. can support the Philippines? Thank you.
Regarding your point that the U.S. just using the Philippines as a tool, honestly, I believe that. I believe in that. But there are, for your first question, there's really a big change in attitude on how President Bongbong Marcos looks at China now compared to when he visited this, I think, January last year. That's a question that I cannot answer out here in the open. And my colleague here, Dr. Romel Banlawi, knows about that. Maybe we can have a more one-on-one session so I can answer, because some of the answers I know are not for public consumption. But as it is, this is the problem with China-Philippine relations is a matter of perception. Is it true that we are sabotaging you, or is it true that you are sabotaging us? I don't think so. It's a matter of perception. There's so much in our relationship that needs to be drawn out. We need to talk about. You don't really understand us. Among others, the Philippines is different from the rest of ASEAN. Please don't lump us with our ASEAN neighbors. First, we are Catholic. We are Christians. We're the only Christian, apart from small East Timor, of course. We're the only Christian nation in the Philippines. And our culture, our focus is more really towards the U.S. because of U.S. colonization. Nobody else has been colonized except Vietnam for a short time. And I think, so the influence of the U.S. is deeply ingrained in us. But still, we're still Asians. And we still subscribe to some of the basic beliefs of Asians. Among others, neighborhood, pakikipagkapwa. It's just a matter of how you perceive us, how you perceive you, and how that perception shapes our attitude towards each other. But this I can say, we have very wrong perceptions of each other. We need to talk. Okay, we need to talk. Thank you.
That's very important, the cultural differences. I did notice that in ASEAN, Philippines is always reluctant to sign up to whatever we agree, so I have to wait for Manila. But do we have other questions? 我想大家可能要注意到，这个 Carlos 没法代表马克思讲话，他可能不是政府的代表，但是这个大家比较关注这个问题，还是我觉得。
I used to be a government official actually. I was the Assistant Director General of the Office of the National Security Advisor about more than 10 years ago. Dr. Roman knows that. But I'm basically an academician now.
Okay.
I handle international relations.
People expect you to speak on behalf of Bongbong. 我们还有点时间，再提。这儿有2个，这儿一位，那儿一位，后边还有一位，3个。这儿一位，这儿一位，4个哪里还有？哦，那个后边有2位。你们都一起提吧，反正最后一轮了。
谢谢，我是封面新闻记者。这个问题想提给吴老师，包括傅莹老师。近年来，美国其实在不断的深化相关的印太战略，包括菲方在南海的举动，其实对于美国的支持是分不开的。那么，美国其实不断的加强对亚太地区的军事部署，包括和盟友的联合军演。您如何？
这是问题还是观点？
问题，您如何来看待美方在亚太地区的动作？ 然后如何维护东盟的地区的和平与安全？谢谢。
美方的动作你都讲了，还需要我们讲吗？是下面一个问题。
I'm from Shenzhen, Qiwei. I want to ask Mr. Cai, how do you think about the Chinese and the China-U.S. relation will affect the security in Asia and the Pacific? How will the relations between China and the U.S. affect the security in Asia and in Asia Pacific?
OK， 好。那位男士刚才举手了，然后他旁边这位女士。
你好，中新网记者提问，我们也想问一下蔡先生，就是您刚才提到说，咱们东盟东南亚地区已经持续了30多年的这个和平，那么我们想问一下，就是说，那在这个过程中，您认为中国扮演了哪些积极的角色，或者说发挥了哪些建设性的作用？谢谢。
好，谢谢。旁边这位女士，对。
My question is for Mr. Carlos, and my question is that you mentioned that the South China Sea issue should be handled based on interstate relations rather than territorial delimitation. But we all know that the Philippines side, especially the Philippines Congress, passed the Maritime Zone Act this year and submitted a new submission to the United Nations Commission on the limits of the continental shelf. In this context, how do you think ASEAN centrality should be played, and how China and the Philippines should conduct dialogue in accordance with your suggestion? Thank you.
最后还有2位，那穿蓝衣服刚才举手，还有这位女士，最后2个了哈。I'm a journalist from Hongxin News, and I want to we have different representatives from different countries from ASEAN, and I just want to ask you everybody about ASEAN have differences like what Mr. Commander have said, like Thailand and Myanmar are Buddhist countries, so how do you make collective and agreements and collective actions among those differences? Thank you. 好，这儿这位女士，然后这边那个还有男士，对。
蔡所长你好，我这个问题想问您的，是这样的，我记得我今年看了一个就是尤瑟夫你们的那个战略研究所有一个就是调查吧，调查这个结果呢，就是说战对美国的下降了10个百分点，而战对中国的就是选边，就问这个中南你这个国家啊，选边站队啊，你是站队哪个国家？那么这个站队美国的明显下降了，将近10个百分点。而站对中国的呢，提升了将近10个百分点。所以我想问一下，就是说您怎么来解释这样一个问题？就是这些年来，美国在东南亚这个域外国家，它究竟做了什么，使得东南亚这个国家对美国现在做了这么大的一个调整啊？大概是这个问题。
这边还有一个问题，最后一个问题了。好。
你好，我是查尔协会的研究员陈玉成。我的问题其实是跟之前不太一样，因为安全问题其实不光是这个传统安全问题，也有这个非传统的安全问题。那我觉得，尤其在东南亚，这个东盟国家，网络犯罪、网络安全，还有很多这种这个非传统安全问题，也有很大的这个影响。我想问问中国，在这方面有没有能帮助到东盟，或者是双方有没有进一步合作解决这些问题的空间，而不是说就是聚焦在南海或者这些可能冲突比较严重的问题。
好，谢谢啊。Now we have quite a few questions, and our time is almost up. So can we each make a comment? You can either answer the questions, or you can make a conclusion. So if you take the questions, maybe 2 minutes. If you conclude, 1 minute. Can we start from Yusuf? Anand, do you want to start?
Well, I just would like to stress what I said earlier, that we in ASEAN definitely is looking into our reforms. We think, or I think, maybe my colleague might be different, that without all these changes that has to be made in the activities and the way ASEAN is working, and also, you know, in the institutions that we are building, I don't think we can last. Of course, for the time being, you feel that we are not a partner that is really doing anything positive. But I think we have to get our eyes together. And what I have said earlier, there will be an effort definitely on many of us, especially in the second track, that would like to get more change than what has happened until now. And the reason why it is so, because to be frank, Indonesia is lacking in leadership. Now we have a stronger president, and I hope he is going to take, you know, the bull by its horn and change somewhat. Otherwise, we have no chance.
Okay, Mr. Tuan.
Okay, let me try and answer some questions. I think first of all, the question was how does U.S.-China relations affect security in Asia Pacific? Oh, of course, yes, huge impact. So if U.S. and China somehow get into a conflict, it's obvious, right? We don't need a third war in the world. And any war that happens in the Asia-Pacific region is going to totally transform the environment of Southeast Asia, which certainly will not be positive. So I think all the economic growth will dry up, and perhaps there will be a big step backward for everyone. So avoiding a conflict between the US and China is in the interest of everyone. I think that even short of a conflict, there are some things that US-China, if there's cooperation on issues of common interest such as climate change, it will be great for the region. It will be very positive. Even things like AI, technology, it is also great if US and China can cooperate, because that will also lift the Asia-Pacific region. How has China participated in bringing about the peace in ASEAN over the last 30 years? I think China has played a big part, because in way back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, China actually stopped supporting insurgency movements in Southeast Asia. That actually led to the peaceful atmosphere in Southeast Asia that then actually allowed for economic growth to carry on. Since then, China has been a very active partner in ASEAN, played a very constructive role. It's probably the most active in every work stream, so I think it has played a significant role on that front and continues to do so today. But there are things that China does which is of concern to ASEAN, and I think those need to be addressed, including the issue of the South China Sea that has been extensively discussed. Reduction of the choice for the US in the recent survey. I have two explanations for this. The first one is very obvious. It is what's happening in Gaza. The region has got 3 majority Muslim countries. Their choice of the US dropped from about 40% to about 20%, right? So clearly they opted for China in this choice because of what's happening in Gaza. In the other countries now, may not be Muslim, but also very unhappy with what happened in Gaza. I think the other thing is that the US during this period also is going through an election, and there's uncertainty as to whether its commitment to the region will still be as strong after the election. So that's another reason why there was this 10% drop, which was cited by the questioner. Lastly, maybe I just add to the answer on how do we settle things within ASEAN. I must say, to kind of remind my friend Carlos, that actually the differences in ASEAN are not just the Philippines. There's huge diversity within ASEAN, and every country is different from the others, and I don't need to point them out, because you look at any dimension, political, economic, social, cultural, religious, ethnic, every dimension. ASEAN is different from each other, and so Philippines is different from the rest, but no, actually everybody is different from everybody else. But that is part of the strength of ASEAN, that we are able to live with each other in this very diverse kind of community. And because we understand that, then we can settle differences, right? We have to negotiate, we have to be patient, we have to try and understand each other as best as we can. So that's how we would solve it. Certainly don't go into any blows with each other.
Carlos, please.
Thank you very much. Before I would like to answer the last question. We should realize that the conflict in the South China Sea, particularly between China and the Philippines, is part of a dynamic process. And the signing of the Archipelagic Baseline Act is just one episode in this dynamic process. But the thing is, it's not cast in stone. The process will not stop there. We just need to talk and talk. Before things escalate, we need to really conduct dialogues, and ASEAN should be the primary mechanism for that until we really develop trust with each other. Nobody wants to be branded as you're not trustworthy. Everyone wants to be branded as trustworthy. So it's just a matter of perception, whether we perceive that the other party is trustworthy or not. There's nothing to lose, but we have everything to gain if we keep on talking to each other. Thank you.
Okay, Mohammed Saeed, please.
Thank you. I think for 7 decades, ASEAN has managed to adapt to many situations, and we should continue to be like that, okay, for the next hundreds of years, I hope. Okay, to answer the question from the young lady just now, we focus more on our shared challenges, shared interests, and then we work from there. I think the key word for today's session is about communication. There are many types of communication, but we talk or we communicate positively. Thank you.
好，我想回答2个问题提出我的这个发言。第一个就是关于美国在本地区发挥的作用。我的一个基本判断或者说我的观点，美国在本地区，尤其在安全领域发挥的作用，我认为是消极的，是负面的，甚至带有破坏性的。这可以从17年以来，美国针对中国境内的一些小多边的安全机制，基本上都是针对中国的。从南海政策来讲，美国以前他还曾经讲过，美国在南海问题、南海领土归属不持立场。事实上，美国现在领土归属不持立场这句话也不说了。美国的南海政策，依我看已经不再中立，而是选边站。什么选边站？谁在南海问题上面给中国制造麻烦，侵犯中国的权利和主张，美国就支持谁。这是我的这位朋友的第一个问题。这个刚才这位朋友提的，说中国东盟南海问题，事实上，南海问题不是中国和东盟之间的问题，只是中国和东盟少数南海沿国之间的问题。那么就中国和这些国家来讲，比如说中国和菲律宾之间，中国和越南之间，南海问题也不是双边关系的全部。所以说，南海问题不是中国东盟关系的全部。事实上，中国和东盟的关系已经上升为全面战略伙伴关系，而且从2022年开始，中国和东盟就经济合作的规模而言，中国已经连续15年是东盟的第一大贸易伙伴。东盟从2019年开始，连续4年成为中国的第一大贸易伙伴。那么就中国和东盟之间的合作覆盖了政治、经济、安全、人文交流、教育。就人文交流的规模已经达到双向的人员互访已经超过了2000万人次每一年。所以回答你的问题，南海问题只是中国东盟关系的一个小问题，而不是全部。谢谢。
谢谢，我们时间到了，就不再提问了哈。刚才这个论坛呢，我觉得还是很有收获的，谈得很好。大家都认为过去这一段是成功的，就是过去的30年，东盟在这个地区发挥作用是成功的。同时大家也都注意到形势在发生变化，有新的挑战。 虽然我们很多发言人都强调要团结、要对话、要沟通，但是从问题当中可以看到，大家对这个地区出现的新的问题，尤其是对一些争议问题，对这个地区形势的影响，甚至有时候成为媒体上最关注的、最突出的问题，这个也是一个现实情况。但是我有一点结束的时候，我想说的一点就是，东盟在中美的这个美国挑起对华战略竞争当中发挥的什么作用？我觉得这个作用不能忽视。是什么作用呢？就是东盟拒绝选边站队，东盟不愿意参与这样一场地缘争夺，这一点本身就非常重要，因为东盟的这种态度，甚至有时候东盟的沉默，可以成功的让这个地区避免分裂。因为美国从奥巴马时代就开始转轴亚洲，就是不停的在拉东盟国家这个参与战队，最后也不过就拉起几个国家搞一些小的多边。但是从大的环境、大的形势上来看，我们看这个地区，更多的看到的就是刚才老吴最后提到的，我们经济合作的上升，我们这个国家关系、国家对话解决问题这样一种基本的态势是维持下去的。所以我觉得不能忽略东盟的这个大家都看到东盟好像我们好多事情上不能达成一致啊，或者是有些事情这个发挥的这个强势的作用不够。但是我觉得东盟有它自身的特点，它就是这样一批就10个中小国家能够团结起来，在这个地区发挥了一种像一种秤砣一样的这个锚定的这样一种作用，所以我们还是尊重的。那么中国为什么一直以来坚定不移地支持东盟，也是看中了东盟这样一种跟中国很多共识，作为发展中国家，作为有相同历史经历的这样一些这个国家，我们能够在大的问题上总是能够想到一起去。所以今天非常感谢各位的这个讲话，也感谢大家的参与，谢谢。
打开。
这不让带走。不是我们来吗？
就把东西放这儿，算一会儿过来。
来吗？
我把牌子放这儿，直接把牌子放这儿。对。
牌子放在哪？
放这儿一会儿过来。这站咱走行吗？
尊敬的各位来宾，大会将在10分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态，谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 10 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上，谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese, and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much. 大会将在5分钟后开始，请您尽快就座，并将手机等通讯设备置于静音状态。谢谢合作。Distinguished guests, our conference will start in 5 minutes. Please be seated and mute your mobile phones and other electronic devices. Thank you for your cooperation. 尊敬的来宾，请注意置于座椅上的同传设备。频道1为中文频道，频道2为英语频道。如果同传设备故障，请到位于会场后方的同传设备更换处更换。会议结束后，请将同传设备放置在座椅上。谢谢。Distinguished guests, there are simultaneous interpretation devices on your seats. Channel 1 is for Chinese and Channel 2 is for English. If you have any problem with the interpretation devices, please ask the staff at the back of the hall for help. At the end of the conference, please leave your interpretation devices on your seats. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. Let's start our the second half discussion about session 5, the right way for China and the U.S. to get along. So for those of you who were here in our first half of the discussion, you must notice that we had a very fruitful and interesting discussion, particularly about the problem, the challenges that China and the U.S. are facing, and also why. So basically, when I discussed with my colleague General Yao for the Division of Labor, so we decided that her first half will more or less focus on diagnosis. And this session, we will try to focus on solutions. So for China-US relations, of course, this is an extremely complicated and difficult relations. So we can blame each other forever, right? We can have finger pointing forever, endlessly, you know. And we can also, different people have different diagnoses. We have different understanding about the problems and challenges. So I think for this session, I'd like to encourage our panelists to put aside your analysis about the problem and also who is correct, who is wrong, who should be blamed, but look ahead and try to be constructive, practical, to think about how can we get along, how can the two countries coexist in the region and in the world. So for the sake of our two countries and also for the region and for the world. So for this purpose, in this session, we have very distinguished experts here. So I will be very brief. From my left, Professor Wu Xinbo. He's the Dean of Institute for International Studies, Fudan University, from Shanghai. And Mr. Chuck Spraggio, research staff member at Institute for Defense Analysis, and he's also former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in DOD. So then Mr. Matthew Das, Executive Vice President, Center for International Policy from the US. And then Professor Huang-Ji Ho, the Director, Institute for Global Strategy and Cooperation, from Hankook University of Foreign Studies from South Korea. And then two ladies, my friend Caris Witt, she's the founder and executive director for the Sino-Israel Global Network and Economic Leadership. So we always call that as Signal. Yeah, Signal from Israel. And last but not the least, Miss Sarah, how to pronounce? I'm sorry. Zineris. Am I correct? Yeah. Sorry for misspelling. Yeah. Zineris. She's a research fellow from the Department of the War Studies, King's College from London, UK. So, without much ado, I will invite our panelists to have first round of remark. So each of you have 6 minutes for the first round of discussion. So start from Professor Wu. So about the solution, what's your solution? No matter you have big plan or maybe concrete step, both are welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. When we think about the approaches to China-US relations, we have to realize that China and the US at the moment have somewhat different goals about this relationship. For China, we think this relationship is bad and we need to improve it. This relationship can be better. For the US, or at least for the Biden administration, they think the situation is okay as long as the two countries do not take competition to conflict. So what you need to do is not to improve it, but to add a little bit stability to it. So if we are not exactly on the same page with regard to the goals, it's very difficult for us to agree on what measures should be taken to address the problems confronting us. Now, from a Chinese perspective, I agree that this relationship can be better, and there is room for us to take, both sides to take actions to improve this relationship. Now, I'm a scholar, so scholars like to play with concepts. Let me start with two basic concepts. One is what I call strategic realism. The other is tactical pragmatism. Now let me try to explain how these two concepts may apply to this relationship. First, for strategic realism, that means when we think about China-US relations, we should not just think about it bilaterally. We should put it in a broader context, in the global context, to say, the shifting power balance, emerging multipolarization, and ongoing globalization. All these trends, how they affect the dynamics between China and the United States. And then we will understand this is no longer a unipolar world. If the U.S. still believes this is a unipolar world, the U.S. goal in the world is to maintain its primacy. Any country emerging, no matter if China or Japan, will be defined as competitor, then it's very difficult to have good relations between two countries. Let's remember when President Nixon decided to improve relations with China, he had a very important judgment that the world at that time was moving from bipolarity to multipolarity, and China was emerging as one of those new polarities. And the U.S. should recognize the reality and deal with China as an emerging power center. So that is the philosophy behind Nixon's China policy. I think today is also very important for the U.S. to understand that this is no longer a unipolar world. We are moving toward a multipolar world, and the rise of China is just one part of the development. So that is about the shifting, how the shifting power balance is changing the context in which China and the U.S. view each other and view its own position in this world. This also relates, strategic realism also relates to the understanding about the limit of each other's action. That means what's the boundary for each other's actions? What are the red lines for each other's actions? If we have a better understanding of the red lines or parameters, borders of our action, then we will exercise strategic restraint in dealing with each other, and even in a multilateral context. So that is the starting point for China and the U.S. to think about how not only how to stabilize this relationship, but further how to improve this relationship. Because without this kind of understanding of the big picture, it's very difficult, very, very difficult for us to generate the necessary political and strategic wisdom to take the necessary action. So that's the first concept, strategic realism. The second concept, tactical pragmatism, which means if we have the direction clear, yes, we want to improve this relationship, then tactically we should do all the things necessary to promote the process of improvement. For example, one is to encourage the interactions between two countries and two societies, dialogue, communication, engagement, government level, non-government level, and especially among the young generation of people of our two countries is very, very important. Do everything as much as we can to promote the interactions between two countries. Secondly, we should also seize every opportunity to promote cooperation between two countries, bilaterally or multilaterally. If sometimes it's difficult to conduct cooperation between the central government and the federal government, let's encourage provincial government, state government, local governments. Let's encourage NGOs to societies to conduct cooperation as they wish and as they like. And there are many areas that our two countries can cooperate. And third, we should all do our best to reduce the risk of confrontation and conflict. So for that purpose, I would propose that maybe between China and US, we can establish a joint committee of scholars, experts, and former government officials. This committee will work out two lists. One is called the positive list. The other is called the negative list. So maybe for, let's say, every 3 or 5 months, this committee will convene and let's look at the positive list. What each side has been doing in the last several months to promote cooperation and reduce the risk of confrontation and risk and conflict. And what each side has been doing to actually contribute to raise the level of risk of conflict and confrontation. So, and then each side, should report this to their respective government and make a recommendation about what should be done next. So if we can form this kind of joint committee and continue to work on an equal and constructive basis, we can keep a very good track of the trend in this relationship. And to be joined by, scholars, business community, civil society, journalists, we can really generate this positive momentum for this relationship. And this, in my opinion, is, tactical, but it's very pragmatic, given the current political situation in both countries. So we cannot just rely on the two governments to solve the problem. We really need to mobilize the positive forces from two societies to work for this common goal. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Wu, for your two concepts and one committee. Yeah, I have some questions, but I will ask you that later. So next goes to Mr. Sparger.
Thank you so much. First, I have to say thank you to both hosts of this forum and the organizers of this particular session. It's really an amazing orchestration. Second, I certainly applaud the topic of our panel. I also applaud the first panelists who had really interesting insights, and certainly the panelists here who are an amazing set of experts. I will note with some dissatisfaction that this is normally the way policy is made. One team gets to diagnose the problem, and then the second team is stuck with trying to figure out how to solve all the problem, which I'm always on the second panel, unfortunately. What we've been asked is to center our comments on prescriptions and policy suggestions, in contrast to the previous panel's focus on diagnosis and challenges. What I can provide, perhaps, is insights into a small but important subset of how China and the United States can and should get along, which is through defense relations. My main prescription is to reaffirm a new framework for U.S.-China defense relations that really can surmount the intensification of rivalry and expand areas of cooperation which actually do exist. It's hard to imagine sometimes. Why do we need to seek that framework? I think it's important to explain that. None of the shortfalls in U.S.-China defense relations are particularly new, and no framework will correct deeply rooted strategic mistrust and mounting systemic rivalry. Yet even the loose structure of defense relations that had been built over 3.5 decades have eroded into threadbare use. For example, the most senior defense policy dialogue, which is called the Defense Consultative Talks, have not convened for a decade. Looking toward the distant horizon, as competition deepens, there is little confidence that the deficits in both the architecture and conduct of current defense relations will keep pace with the requirements of the next decade, which include the need to sustain de-escalation and crisis prevention mechanisms. Some of the interrelated shortfalls to get to some policy prescriptions include first, structure. By both design and practice, legacy policy dialogues address independent issues that are rarely linked together. Absent a holistic structure, as was mentioned, incentives to build to accumulating conclusions or outcomes are rare. Further, the lack of interdependence amongst dialogues accepts and sometimes even incentivizes each side to cancel or postpone dialogues or exchanges with little cost. The second is discipline. In addition to the lack of structure, the diverse and often distributed execution of defense relations results in fragmented or shallow engagements and produce inconsistent outcomes. Absent unifying themes or consistency, in many cases, the messengers and the messages are very clouded. They lack depth, they impede deepened understanding, and they really hamper policy development and, frankly, policy resolution. The last is purpose. The U.S.-China defense relations of the past are often accurately characterized as transactional, prioritized by quantity over quality, and measured by the exchange as the objective itself rather than some meaningful outcome. Many exchanges over the years were added based on nothing more than individual or organizational caprice, and exacerbated by both sides lacking the political authority or capital to constrain and focus them. The quantitative rather than qualitative nature of the exchanges inhibits stability, drives risk as competition emerges, and remains overly subject to disruption as a political signaling device. My policy suggestions, therefore, center on some imperatives and remedies. Maturation of defense relations to address the shortfalls above demand really both some repair and some new approaches. Some of the corrective actions should include, frankly, routinization. This is an undervalued characteristic, which is just establish a modern framework for exchanges via an agreed-to rhythm, one that's set on a calendar and that provides structure and enhances stability and bolsters utility. The second is order. We have to garner bilateral unity of effort through really secretary and presidential level guidance, refreshed policy guidance, and improved collaboration forum. Third is focus. We have to prioritize policy dialogues and really call out or cut out outdated events to reframe defense relations for the conditions that we're going to see in the next decade, 2025 to 2035. Recognizing that preservation of some legacy events will help, should help, overcome inherent skepticism and resistance by both sides, but there's going to be change that's necessary. The last point I have is integration. We really have to work with other organs of national power to link defense relations outcomes to higher and adjacent contacts and exchanges. Too often, they just operate independently of each other when really the pressures come from both sides. I'll pause there. There's, I think, more to cover that we can get into greater detail in some Q&A session, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Spadgia, for very concrete and practical, suggestions to improve the existing, communication dialogues to make it more effectively. I also thank you for limiting your remark within 6 minutes. Thank you. So next, Mr. Das.
Thank you. I just want to echo my fellow panelists in thanking the forum and welcoming me here to Beijing, and also for this particular discussion. I've noticed that the discussions of U.S.-China relations tend to be some of the best attended, which I think signals the great amount of interest and in many times concern about the state of that relationship and its future. I'm also going to cheat just a little bit because I know we're supposed to focus entirely on the solutions, but I do think it's worth digging down in a bit more of the diagnosis, at least from the U.S. political domestic perspective, to understand the direction of U.S. policy and some of the, I think, really important historic changes we're witnessing right now in U.S. policy. So while I'm here as a member of U.S. civil society, not a member of the U.S. government, I'm going to do my best to describe the current state of the policy debates in the U.S. and how I think these relate to the ultimate question of how the U.S. and China can get along. I think while many Americans have questions about China's ultimate goals in the world, I think most American leaders and most of the American people understand that the U.S. and China simply need to find ways to work together. There will be areas of disagreement, sometimes strong disagreement on issues of human rights, privacy, tech and trade, and others. But we can have a multifaceted relationship in which we cooperate, compete, and when necessary, confront. But I think the key is to keep talking. Right now, the U.S. foreign policy is in a period of transition between an old era and a yet undefined new one. Donald Trump's surprise victory in the 2016 presidential election awakened many in our policy community to the reality that despite Washington's presumption of an unquestioned foreign policy consensus, many American voters had very serious questions about the assumptions and ideas that had guided decades of U.S. foreign policy. So there's no new Washington consensus yet, not yet at least. There is instead a contest for what will be the next paradigm for U.S. foreign policy. There are some who wish to subordinate all concerns to the imperatives of great power competition. There are others who want the U.S. to pull back into a more restrained goal in global affairs. And of course, there remain those who cling to every scrap of the old neoliberal international order and the belief in the necessity of American primacy. I think the Biden administration has taken several important steps toward defining a new approach, probably best articulated in an April 2023 speech by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, recognizing that a global trade policy based on reducing inequality and economic precarity through equitable trade, labor, and investment rules could have enormous positive consequences for American workers and potentially for communities around the world. And that's part of the logic that undergirds the strong push inside the United States now for government investment in American manufacturing and infrastructure and strengthening people's faith in government by addressing the long-neglected needs of working families and communities. And this is why I'm addressing a security conference by talking about jobs and the economy, because building a strong and durable American political consensus is essential for the United States to remain a reliable and effective partner for China or for anyone. I think the U.S. public understands how diplomacy and cooperation with China can provide benefits and security for Americans, as evidenced recently when China imposed new controls on fentanyl, which has had a devastating impact on many of our communities and families. I think there are other steps China can take in the diplomatic realm to be seen as a partner to the U.S. China showed a willingness to play a brokering role in Saudi-Iran détente, even if that was pretty pre-baked. It also played a constructive role, I think, in trying to broker Palestinian unity talks, even if that was not baked at all. Playing a similarly constructive role elsewhere would also be welcome, particularly as regards Russia's war in Ukraine. I think it's important to note that a positive relationship of cooperation cannot be based on illusions. The U.S. and China can build a more collaborative security order, but it can't be built on redirecting insecurity toward others, be they ethnic, religious minorities, human rights defenders, or political activists internally or externally. Peace between our two countries is possible if it rests on a foundation of peace within our respective societies. And while leaders everywhere exploit the failings of their adversaries for their own political ends, I think it's a mistake to simply dismiss these concerns. The American people do genuinely care about human rights and support a foreign policy that reflects that. So here I'm coming to the prescription part of it, just a few ideas for how we can put the relationship on a better footing. One, from a U.S. perspective, advance global priorities that break away from an outdated and counterproductive great power competition mindset. The embrace of this worldview with an unquestioned need to, quote, win the future defines U.S. interests as a zero-sum fight that drains resources and goodwill. Both of our countries need to recognize and secure their interest in the reality of a multipolar world rather than attempting to forestall it by a costly and ultimately self-defeating effort to disadvantage others. A new approach to defining success in global influence should focus on global public goods like universal public health infrastructure and green energy, significantly increasing development investment in those countries and regions that have been starved of capital for decades, guaranteeing human, political, and labor rights globally. Building international cooperation around such a transformation of the global economy would reestablish or could reestablish U.S.-China relations on a new foundation, revive the legitimacy of international norms by expanding the opportunity it offers to people of all countries, and address the truly existential threats we all face. Second, investing in the domestic critical technology workforce while cooperating on shared challenges like climate. The Biden administration has already taken steps to increase domestic production capacity for technologies critical to the security and the economy of the United States, especially advanced technologies and those essential to address challenges like climate change. The only true growth trajectory, however, is one anchored in U.S.-China collaboration. The technologies needed to survive, mitigate, and overcome climate and global health threats will not be built in one nation and will require significant investment and cooperation from governments across the world. Both China and the U.S. face tremendous challenges from warming temperatures, particularly around desertification and water security, exploiting these vulnerabilities elsewhere in the world in the hope that they lead to crisis and instability and strategic opportunity is both unethical and dangerous. Instead, our country should approach cooperation on addressing these urgent imperatives, leveraging non-debt creating climate finance investments, for example, to provide critical technical assistance to developing countries as an opportunity to build trust and identify areas of mutual benefit on other issues. So in closing, developing a stable and constructive relationship between the United States and China won't always be easy, as we all know, but is a choice that we can make, and I think the future peace of the planet requires us to make it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Das, for those suggestions, particularly about those public goods, global challenges, very important perspective. So after three panelists from the U.S. and China, now let's turn to the regional or other countries, other regions' perspective. So we'll start from our neighbor, Professor Huang from ROK.
谢谢主持人。这份分组会议的主题。这一组的这个主题是与其他分组很不同。其他议题涉及地区多边关系，或者技术领域方面。可是本组这个会议是唯一的双边关系。就只有一个对方一方，但它是一个高维方程，比多边关系还复杂，比技术领域更需要高难度技术。标题也是与其他会议不一样，这不是我们许多安全会议上见的标题。中美正确相处之道，这中文标题中吸引我的是道。在中文中，道不只是一个意思，道路这个以外，它还有很多其他的含义，如道德、道理、规律、方向、方法等。题目反映了中方对当前中美关系的担忧，同时改善的意愿。事实上，中美关系已经变得过于复杂和庞大，不可能再回到过去美好时光。对两国来说，最好的出路是避免新冷战。现实的做法是管理现状，预防危机和积极沟通。对国际社会来说呢，美中做自己最擅长的事，真诚地参与良性竞争。规则最好是100%中立、公正，但是呢，要不然呢，至少 国际社会可以接受的水平，最后让历史来评判。我很难正确回答中美相处之道，多么正确就很难说。拜登之后的中美关系若仍要找出路，那必须在实现战略层面的道达成一些思考，而不仅仅是战术层面的路。关于讨论，我想从战略的角度，从原则的角度谈，有助于我表达自己的想法。先，美国需要明确对华政策。美国对中国过度警惕和恐惧，看不到大局。在特朗普时期，美国过于注重经济利益，看不到战略大局。拜登时期，试图了从战略角度出发，却忽略了经济细节，就去风险。他们一开始对中国感到愤怒，后来发现了自己的这个弱点，不得不加以改正。他们没有仔细审视全局，战略和战术都很不理想，所以美国的对华政策需要尽早重新定义、重新设定。中国尽量减少可能误导中美关系的情况。在中国，当前的国际秩序被称为100年以来第一次大动荡。这种暗示要建立新国际秩序的说法，只是会增加美国的猜疑和恐惧。而且目前的秩序究竟是处于重大转型期、重大动荡期，还是暂时骚乱，也待观察。新型国际关系使当前美国主导的国际关系成为旧型国际关系了。认为最好称之为新兴国际关系，我觉得这个可能大家可以接受的吧。相反，中国应该发出愿意与美国合作的信息。中国必须明确其发挥作用的承诺，小心处理可能敏感的外交概念。中美应该下力健康竞争，下力健康竞争有利于国际社会的发展。特朗普先用战，其成为右翼词汇，但 Make America Great Again， 让美国再次伟大，仍是美国应有之义。这种国家民族愿望也当然适用于其他所有国家。只要他有能力和意愿的话，也可以这么做。中国也可以做 Make China Great Again， 让中国再次伟大。中美两国为国际社会提供远景和责任的公平竞争是对国际社会最好的。最后，记住未来历史将如何铭记这一天很重要。我认为，道就是历史，正确美中相处之道，不应该是司马昭之心。任何动摇国际社会稳定的意图和行动，路人皆知。国际社会以民愤大义为指导，渴望远见主事。国际社会期待行动和牺牲的王道领导。我的发言到这，谢谢。
好，谢谢黄教授啊，用中文做了演讲，而且
我觉得思维方式也是挺中国的啊，给我们提了很多那个道的想法。其实我们特别欢迎那个韩国作为第三方啊，中美之外，给我们提出这些比较公正的这些建议，我觉得确实是特别有意思的，谢谢您。Okay, our next speaker is Chris from Israel.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the conference. This is my 5th time coming, and it's always really enriching. And I also want to thank the conference for accepting Israel onto the U.S.-China panel. This is a really refreshing experience for me to give this perspective of a small middle power on what's happening here. And as a tech powerhouse, especially per capita, that has deep ties to the U.S., but also wider relations developed with China over the last 15 years, Israel has more of an up-close and personal perspective on this relationship than you might think. And I believe that I speak for all the countries of the world when I say that regardless of our size and stature, none of us want to see a split between U.S. and China, and certainly none of us want to see a kinetic conflict. One phrase that I don't hear at this conference and haven't heard lately is that the East is rising and the West is declining. And many times America has been written off, but I think we all have to admit, and it has been said here many times, that the U.S. is still the dominant force, still the only superpower, but at the same time, the challenge in power, and it is challenging in many ways, has grown in impact and popularity. We just saw FOCOP. That was very impressive. In response to these shifts, many middle powers position and influence and seeking to be more relevant. But I do want to remind China and the U.S. that we constitute most of the world. And although we worry so much about them, there is a possibility that we could work together and unite to rein in the behavior of the U.S. and China in ways that we believe is for the global good. In this new landscape, China and the U.S. do seem to be pulling away from each other, and for all intents and purposes, the small and middle powers are asking themselves, okay, where does that leave us? And we would like to see that there is a merger of interests, but we do have to note that the great powers are each upping their game. And at the same time, they can't go it alone. Take, for example, China's very strong effort to expand BRICS and bring in the Gulf countries, or its claim to lead the global south. It needs those numbers. Or look at how the U.S. is moving from a hub and spokes approach to this lattice strategy where not only are small and middle powers cooperating and coordinating with the U.S., but also with each other, as we see with the U.S., Japan, Korea, trilateral, and the Quad, Australia, Japan, India, and the U.S. This speaks to the role, the growing role, of middle powers. And I think that middle powers can also contribute to creating opportunities for U.S. and China to cooperate. And I have 4 points of cooperation that I want to bring to the table. And this was really difficult. I spoke to Chinese, Americans, Israelis, experts, academics, officials, and when we got down to it, the strategic competition sort of wipes out value of any suggested cooperation. But nonetheless, I want to make these 4 suggestions. We know that track 2 is easy, and I think you've heard it from 2 of the other panelists. We need to have more communication. We can discuss all issues in track 2, we can speak freely, there's really nothing at stake. And when it moves to track 1, it breaks down with the same topics because competition, rivalry, politics. So perhaps, I think it was suggested by our Chinese speaker, is a track 1 track 1.5, where track 1 provides a framework to facilitate, and the point 5 allows us to pursue more action plans and bring in more players and hear more voices. And as one of my colleagues who's here today suggested, where there's too much friction, move back to track 2. Another area where maybe we can cooperate is standards and regulations in the less explored areas that impact China and US, and of course that's space and AI, in at least to the degree where both sides benefit. Start at a level where we're talking about cooperation to strengthen security for US, China, and the world. And of course, at a level where there can be verification. Another suggestion is US-China middle power projects in infrastructure, and I would like to specifically suggest infrastructure in Africa that focuses on water, desalinization, and wastewater recycling. There's just been floods in Nigeria. There wasn't a great infrastructure in the first place. Israel would love to bring its added value water technology, work with US and China, where we have shared engineers. Perhaps China can contribute workers. China and the US can both work on quality control, and we can have a win-win-win-win where US and China contribute to the continental good in Africa, and Israel's able to make an added value contribution as well. And finally, I would like to talk about supply chains. We know the current trend is competition, maneuvering, shifting, shuffling, so that both parties can secure their interests as they reshape the supply chain ecosystem. But what about considering areas where we can agree are absolutely essential, an essential right, food and energy, and that supply chains for that human right of energy and food could be collaboratively developed so that we ensure that no one feels cornered in that really essential area, and that there's an increased sense of security in food and energy supply, which could be a confidence and trust building foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for, I really love your win-win-win-win solution. Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. Thank you. So again, last but not least, Ms. Sarah Zinius. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm honoured to be here at the forum and for the opportunity to speak to you today. So I'm an academic, and a lot of my work in the last few years has focused on US-China relations, strategic competition, and great power rivalry. Graham Allison, an American political scientist, has written a book about Thucydides, the world's first historian. Thucydides' history was about the Peloponnesian Wars of the 5th century BC. Allison coined the phrase the Thucydides trap. This is the inevitable events that lead to war when a rising power, Athens, threatens to unseat an existing hegemon, Sparta. And Allison, of course, was referring to the relationship between the United States and China. I don't believe that war is inevitable, and also that having this mindset is likely to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is true that wars have been around since the beginning of human civilization. But whether there's been a hot war, hot kinetic war, or a cold coercive war, they have always ended with communication, dialogue, and engagement, however difficult that may be. So today I'm going to offer 3 practical solutions focused on this very simple and obvious, but often difficult to do, dialogue, communication, and engagement. So my first solution is creating a regular open bilateral. And we already have a template for that. So up until 2017, we had the US Strategic Economic Dialogue. Unfortunately, that was terminated during the Trump presidency. But something like that is a potential way for both sides to come together, to have frank and free conversations, and to placate one another. Because often, the really intractable issues are about perceptions and fears. A second solution, I'm building a little bit on my colleague Caris's suggestions earlier, is to engage track 2 and track 1.5 dialogue or back channel diplomacy. And this can be defined as the unofficial, informal interactions between members of adversary groups or nations. The advantage of this approach is being able to get the two sides behind closed doors and to really thrash out these tricky, difficult discussions. Often it's really useful to have a mediator, interlocutor. For instance, New Zealand's been quite active in the Asia Pacific with this format. Back channel diplomacy, or track 2 dialogue, was really successful during the second intifada phase of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Norway was the mediator in that case. And a third practical solution is the concept of strategic balancing. And that became a defining feature of the Cold War. I don't believe that we live at the moment, yet, in a multipolar world. We live in a world with multipolar elements. And the US and China are the most significant powers. So it makes sense for a strategic balancing framework to involve the US and China. And again, drawing on what one of my colleague T6 along, is this concept of problem solving. If the two sides can get together constructively with mutual respect, there might be ways to create a division of labour. Because many of the issues that we're facing today are transnational. Climate change is the biggest threat that humanity faces, and that involves transnational, globalised solutions. So those are just three ways to engage in communication, dialogue and engagement, and there will be many others. But to conclude, although war is not inevitable, it is more likely today than it ever was. And we should aim to learn the lessons learned from the Athenians and the Spartans rather than making our own mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So for your very concrete three suggestions and also put it in a historic context. Thank you. So with that, all of our panelists make their first round of remarks. So we still have about 40 minutes. So I will, before I open the floor, as a moderator, I will raise another round of questions, and this time starting from that side. And I hope each of our panelists try to answer my question, respond to my question with 1 or maybe 2 minutes, I think at maximum, so we can give more time for our audience here. So I will start from Sarah, but actually I have a similar question for Sarah, Caris, and Mr. Huang, Professor Huang, because you three are from different regions. You are very restrained. You didn't mention your respective region, basically, like the Middle East, for example. Caris didn't say much about the Middle East. So my question is, from Europe, the Middle East, and the Northeast Asia's perspective, how can the hotspot issue in your region, like Korean Peninsula, the conflict in the Palestine, and maybe the conflict in Ukraine, is that possible for China and the US to work together on those issues to make those issues as kind of venue for help the two countries to get along, or you believe that there's basically nothing to do, and it's only the place that China and the U.S. will fight against each other or even or hate against each other. So I'd like to know if you have any suggestion to help the two countries from the region. And my question to Matt is, you mentioned the public goods. Yeah. So basically, there are two. I heard a lot of discussion about how to help the two countries to get along. So one approach is starting from those global comments, from those low, not so sensitive issues. But some people say without get kind of consensus over very sensitive, very politicized issue, even the collaboration over those global issues will be limited. Like China and the U.S. didn't collaborate well during the pandemic. We should have, but unfortunately we blame each other. So do you buy this theory? Do you think we can, without reach any consensus over the framework they described, can we really do something meaningful in climate change and other issues? And my question to Chad is, you are very experienced in dialogue between the two militaries. Some people, I heard it both in China and in the U.S., that they believe that the dialogue is the usage of the dialogue is limited, and they believe only a crisis can bring the two to sit down and really seriously have a negotiation, like the Cuban Missile Crisis brought Soviet Union and the U.S. to think about, then they have detente later. So do you think we can really use those dialogue to prevent the crisis, or we have to wait for a crisis to foster a meaningful dialogue? So my last question to Professor Wu is, at the starting point you said that actually China and the U.S., we have some different perception here. The U.S. want to manage, we want to improve. So basically this question is similar to Matthew's, is without reaching an agreement and a common understanding on that, do you think we can really have the strategic realism and the tactical practitionism, because we have effective communication? Because I don't want to let you know my bottom line. You said we need a red line to understand each other's red line, but if my goal is to undermine your interest, why should I let you know my red line? I need to keep it ambiguous. Then I think that kind of lack the common understanding or shared understanding about the goal, the end game, the nature of the relationship. I think that dialogue could be very hard. I want to know your opinion on that. So I will start from Sarah. So please keep your response brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think one of the dangers of strategic competition is the returning to a situation that we saw during the Cold War, where you have these proxy conflicts that escalate. So you have the sort of the top level of the great power rivalry, but that conflict kind of trickles down to regions and sub-regions, and you have these proxy wars, and we're very much seeing that at the moment. So just 3 examples would be the Gaza conflict, the tensions in Yemen with the Houthis, and Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. We're also returning in many ways similar to the Cold War, to this situation of the geopolitical blocs emerging. And although it's quite comfortable for states to kind of retreat to these fortresses, these geopolitical blocs and their spheres of influence, it's not a good way. It's not a conducive way for international affairs to work. So I think that's something that the US-China relationship should consider in its dialogue. And I think the 1990s provides a really good template of where states can work together really effectively. Although that was a unipolar moment in the world, there was a great deal of multilateral cooperation, particularly in the UN. I think in terms of the specific question about how my region, which is Europe, can be helpful in this debate to deal with these issues, is Europe obviously is a kind of real rich tapestry of different countries, different historical experiences, different cultures, different languages. And with that kind of richness, there's a kind of really good understanding of other perspectives. And normative power Europe is a concept that kind of very much relates to the European Union's role in the world. So certainly, I do think that all the regions can contribute. In my case, Europe, I do think it's got a really important role to play, and also the way the sort of the threat within Europe is perceived very different even than the threat is perceived within the US, which is quite interesting because you kind of make the assumption that the Europeans and the United States are very kind of very cohesive in their threat perceptions because of this rise of geopolitical blocs, and obviously Europe being part of the US-led bloc. But actually in Europe, we've got much greater concerns about Russia's invasion of Ukraine than the Americans do, whereas the Americans is all about China. So yes, I do think that absolutely we can all play a role. It's not just about the US and China solving their bilateral issues. All countries of the world can contribute to this issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bruce?
Dunaway, I thanked you for including me in the US-China session, so I didn't have to be in the Middle East session, and now you want me to go back and talk about the Middle East. Although the three of us are from different quote-unquote hotspot regions, I'm the only one whose family has a safe room filled with food and water and a transistor radio that sends off an alarm, and I can charge my phone with it out of fear that Lebanon is going to shoot a missile that is a precision missile that will take out the electric grid, and I will have no food, water, or electricity. So I don't think it's fair to lump me in with everybody else, and I don't think that you want the kind of response that I would give to that question with respect to U.S.-China solving this problem.
I'm sorry, maybe not solving. I don't think we can solve it, but I mean, what can we
China's
do
role
to help the regional countries?
Stop whitewashing Hamas. Call Hamas what it is, which is a terrorist organization. Support Fatah, which is the Palestinian organization that China has supported all along, which Hamas is killed, murdered many of Fatah people in 2007. So I think that is number one thing that China could do.
I mean, what did China and U.S. do together? I mean, not separately.
Reign in Iran. China and the U.S. can work together to reign in Iran. You're not going to like what I have to say. And it's not going to, that is something, if the U.S. and China really wanted to do it, they could probably do it. But you have tried that before. And I think that China's understanding of the Middle East is very much informed by its competition with the U.S. and by its interest in promoting its relations with the global South. And therefore, bringing about cooperation between U.S. and China in our conflict is in conflict with China's interests. And so I don't know that there's too much room for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Professor Huang?
现在国际社会面临几种危险，疫情之后的人道主义危机， 还有非传统这个安全因素引来的也是非传统威胁，还有乌克兰战争，还有中东危机，我们看到的传统地缘政治危机，还有食品安全，还有的半导体等等经济这个威胁经济安全等等啊。那现在朝鲜半岛呢，可能我觉得就属于这个传统地缘政治这个威胁之一，但是目前呢美国的全球这个大战略上呢，它的这个重点这个中东跟欧洲这边所以还有这次共和党还有民主党的这个大选这个过程中，他们准备的公约数都没有看到这个朝鲜朝核问题，所以搞不好为了抓住这个或者影响美国大选朝鲜可能那个大选之前会不会试图可能核试验啊，或者更其他这个办法来这个挑衅等等过了这个时间以后呢，他可能很难挑衅。对，这个是朝鲜方面的这个可能这几个月的这个他想升级中东跟乌克兰战争那个传统地缘政治的这个威胁的这个水平，这个是我先说到这里。
好，谢谢 ，Thank you， Matt。
Sure. I mean, I recall your question. It was, can the U.S. and China find ways to work together, while at the same time the United States deals with its own internal? And I think the answer is they absolutely have to. I mean, it is imperative. I mean, we have challenges that will not wait. I would love if we could deal with some of our internal upheaval first, but we can't. So these things do absolutely have to happen in parallel. I think there are steps that can be taken that will ease the conversation we're having inside the U.S. I mentioned the agreement on fentanyl precursor chemicals. I think that made an impact. Because again, this is something that a lot of Americans, including myself, have felt very close to our families and communities. I think there are other steps that China could take. I mentioned playing a more constructive role with regard to Russia and Ukraine. As of right now, many Americans understand that China's assisting in the reconstitution of Russia's armed forces in a way that is not helpful. I think in the Middle East, with respect to what my colleague said, I think while I think it is true that China is seeing its role in the Middle East through the lens of competition with the U.S., increasingly the U.S. is seeing its role in the region in the same way through the lens of competition with China. I mean, this is part of the logic that underlies the Biden administration's push for this kind of tripartite U.S.-Saudi-Israel deal. It's a way of stitching up a set of relationships in the region against Iran, but also to box China out of the region. I just don't think this is a constructive way to approach the regional policy if we're allowing this, competition with China to crowd out a whole other set of possible constructive engagements.
Thank you. Jack?
Oh, great question. All right, so I'll be more provocative and just say, listen, anybody who doesn't find value in defense relations is utterly ignorant. I was going to use the worst word, but ignorant, I think, is clear enough. Why folks are ignorant is somewhat different on each side, although both sides share that. For the U.S., it's often the lack of consistency and commitment to conducting contacts and exchanges by the interlocutors. Oftentimes for China, it's a deeply rooted strategic mistrust and, frankly, political anxiety caused by its own unique political culture that, although both sides share each of those characteristics, You know, what both sides do share is it's a fear of losing. You know, at best, defense relations is very businesslike, but at worst, frankly, it's a contact sport, and neither side wants to get in that ring and get hit, and you have to train and get back in the ring and learn how to get business done, and you can't fear doing that. And I can't handle when people say they don't like it, because really it is they're scared of getting in the ring. So get in the ring. There's nothing to be afraid of. The question you asked, though, is can we use dialogue to prevent crisis? The simple answer is absolutely yes. And I've participated in several of those where there was real-world crisis emerging, and it was only through having established and routinized forms of communication and decent both personal and organizational relationships that it averted crisis from escalating further. And very clear examples. The most recent one that I understand is with the so-called October surprise in October of 2020. That was a real crisis that was emerging. One side had a misperception, and it was only when the other side, rather than overreacting, reached out, tried to clarify, and the other side trusted that clarification, and it reduced escalation from intensifying. So yeah, and anybody that doesn't understand that there's a series of those in the past between the United States and China don't understand and value why, first and foremost, why you should have defense relations in the first place. So yes, it can. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Well, I think strategic realism and tactical pragmatism still apply as long as both sides, both China and the United States, want a stable relationship without conflict. Even though, one or two of them, both of them do not want to improve it. How may this happen? A major crisis, a major event in this relationship may force both sides to reflect on their actions and understand the border of their activities and then adjust their behavior accordingly. Because China-US relations, like many other relations, bilateral relations, have been event-driven and at some point crisis-driven. So that's one thing. And also for tactical pragmatism, as long as two sides want to reduce the risk of conflict and incidents, certainly they can sit down to discuss how to make that happen. So I think there is still room for this kind of joint work. My concern is actually in the US, you also have the sword sword. And I'm not sure how powerful the sword sword is that they just want to have a bad relationship with China. They just want to have a conflict with China. That will make all this very difficult. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So now it's time to open the floor. Professor Wu Xingbo needs to leave early because of his flight. So I'd like to get one particular question for Professor Wu, and then open the floor to other panelists. So yeah, I saw Michael. Yes. Yeah, our Mike. Yes.
Thank you very much. When I listened to both Chad and Professor Wu's presentation just now, it reminded me of what I often see in the US-China dialogue context, which is a mismatch in the way they talk to one another. So Professor Wu's very interesting principles were very, I think, germane and relevant to addressing some of the problems. And then Chad's very practical suggestions, it made me think that perhaps we need a kind of an app to be able to mesh the way that the US sees how to fix the problem with the way that Chinese interlocutors want to fix the problem, and mesh them in a way that they can be integrated. So those principles that you discussed need to have, and you did, I think, begin to address this with your committee idea. So my question to you is, can you flesh out the committee idea?
Well, I was thinking about something between US and Japan in the early 1990s. they had that kind of, U.S.-Japan relations committee bilateral, and they keep looking at this relationship and working out reports with policy recommendations of both sides. And over time, it did have the impact on their respective policies and bilateral relations. So today, I think it is time that maybe our two countries can also think about creating similar committee comprising people from academia, business community, and also civil society, people who have interest and expertise about international relations, about bilateral relations. So by doing that, we are sending a strong signal to both sides that in spite of the difficulties in this relationship, there still exist positive forces in both countries for better China-US relations. Having said that, I think this, to a large extent, depends on actually who is going to be the next U.S. president. So at the end of the day, U.S. domestic politics matters a lot in the future of this relationship. So I have to leave, but I also...
Before you leave, I want to add one point to your suggestion, to the committee thing. I think in the first day of the committee meeting, the two sides need to work back to back, and each team work out four lists. First is what your side has done in past 1 month, good, positive to the bilateral relations. Then what your side has done, bad, negative for the bilateral relations. And what do you think the other side, what reassuring thing they did in past 1 month, and what negative thing they did in past 1 month. Then the two sides compare notes, compare those four lists. Then you can know the perception gaps of the two sides. Then it's helpful to narrow the gaps. So that's my, suggestion.
That will make this game very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Professor Wu. So we'll open the floor. So, okay, please. Yes.
I'm Raúl from Mexico. It's for all the panelists, a comment for all the panelists, because we talk about strategic things between China and the US and the question of Asia, in Asia. But in other parts of the world, there is a trade war between China and the US. Particularly in North America, Canada, Mexico, and the United States enjoy a free trade agreement. But this agreement will be debated in 2026. And in the middle of the agreement is the China issues. The way that China have trade relations with Mexico, many private Chinese companies, for example, the automobile plants, etc., are going to Mexico. And this is a big debate in Latin America. And nobody talks about the other parts of the world where the China and the US competition is very hard, the trade.
So this question is directing to...
Whatever you want. Yeah,
please. Just briefly address that. I think it's a very good point. I think, what I was talking about, the kind of reckoning that's going on in the United States right now around our trade policy, that really began many years ago in the debate around NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. A lot of the concerns about the lack of worker protections, about the possibility of taking American jobs to other countries. And in fact, that was, again, one of Donald Trump's main issues, and renegotiating essentially NAFTA into a new agreement. We can agree or disagree how different that agreement was, but I think there were some changes made. But yes, the issue of China sending products into the United States via Mexico is a very live issue. But I do think it's important to address this kind of holistically. I mean, we need to confront, America is in the process of confronting and reckoning with a global trade system that did not accrue benefits to the majority of American workers. I think that the Mexico relationship is obviously a very key one. There is probably no other relationship for the United States in the world that more directly impacts the day-to-day lives of Americans than the relationship with Mexico. So thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Senior Colonel Zhao Weibing from the Academy of Military Science, and my question goes to Mr. Chad Sprague. Yeah. So, as a research fellow focusing on the American military studies, I really appreciate your suggestion about improving male-to-male relations. We know just about 2 or 3 years ago, we can still have access to the joint concepts and joint publication doctrines. But now, we cannot download the latest revised versions, though most of them are not classified. So, could you explain the reason why? And is it possible to help arrange some kind of academic exchange on discussing some of the new military concepts put forward by the U.S. military, such as the joint war fighting concept, campaigning, expanded maneuver, pulse operations, etc.? Thank you.
That's great. So we're negotiating now. So what you're saying is China's going to unveil all of its joint training doctrine and concepts, and the United States will do the same thing? Is that what the proposal is? Because I think we'd be all for that. China is pretty opaque with all of it for its documents. It produces a very nice white paper, usually every 2 years, although it's now been 6 years. But that's really about all it does publicly. It doesn't do much publicly. I think it's important to have transparency, but the lack of transparency on one side, there's a limit to, as the Chinese say, the forbearance has limits, right? And the transparency has limits here too. So you'll probably see those close off more. But if you'd like to open it up, I'm certain there's a clear way that you can get the United States to be more transparent again is for China to match that transparency. Is that fair?
You reached the deal, right? We have concrete outcome now.
I will report to Dasdi Chase today. He's somewhere here. So.
Okay. So maybe someone from the back row? No, any? Okay, please.
Lawrence Freeman from the United States. I think one thing that we have to deal with in order to improve relations is the fact that both the United States government, Republican or Democrat, is still governed by the same belief structure, the rules-based order and zero-sum game. And I've been working in Washington for 40 years, I still do. And if anyone tells you it's not true, they're being disingenuous. This mentality grips policy in the United States. And it's a fixed world in which the U.S. has to be on top, and China, Russia, etc. have to be on the bottom. So I proposed a number of years ago the United States Institute for Peace, which is a government-funded think tank in the United States, whose office is across the street from the United States State Department. Something similar to one of the panelists, which is why don't we step outside of the world of the zero-sum game mentality, and China and the United States, together the two economic superpowers, adopt a great mission. And that great mission is to eliminate poverty and hunger in Africa. We have almost 500 million people living on less than $2 a day, and hunger gripping, and this is the cause of instability. And Africa will be the center of economic activity in 25 years with 2.5 billion people. So the United States and China could say we have all our differences, we have different systems, we disagree on a number of things, but we can do this together for the benefit of the future humanity. And I'd like to know where people stand on such a proposal. I made it. It wasn't received that well in the U.S. government. Also, parenthetically, I would like to comment that as an American Jew who also lost his great uncle in the Holocaust, the problem in Israel is that Netanyahu should be removed from power, and we should go back to the great legacy of Yitzhak Rabin, who died a hero for peace. And that would solve a lot of the problems for Israel today and for the future.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Anyone want to respond to particularly the suggestion part? Yes, please.
Yeah, I can take that question. It kind of goes back a little bit to my concept of strategic balancing. And so this is this kind of division of labour format. And although I do believe that we are living in a world with multi-polar elements, and it isn't only just going to be the US and China that are going to be predominant over the next century, there's other major powers such as India that are also going to be part of this, well, hopefully not great power rivalry, but certainly part of the kind of decision making at the top table. I still do believe that the US and China can be extremely effective if they work together on those kind of transnational human security type of issues. You talked about poverty in Africa, and that's absolutely critical. And that there are many other issues. Climate change is clearly the most pressing issue. There are also things like pandemics. Scientists are pretty unanimous that we are going to face more pandemics. Things like, radiation release. So Zaporizhia has obviously been a lot in public consciousness over the last year and a half. But there could be another incident such as Zaporizhia. And those are all problems that require multilateral and transnational solutions. So I think one of the at the moment it's all about sort of this. The focus is very much on the hot war aspects of US and China competition. But if there was a kind of a format or a framework in which the two sides can actually work quite constructively, you can actually create a kind of, by engaging together on less controversial issues, but equally as important issues. You can kind of create a better, create greater respect and greater trust and understanding, and then it can actually help solve those more tricky, hot war kind of issues. So things like feudal diplomacy. So the Greeks and the Turks, they had a really bad period in the 1990s. So it's not necessarily dealing with the most difficult, intractable conflict issues all at once. You can work in other mutually beneficial areas, and that kind of creates the conditions of trust and understanding, which then can kind of feed through to those kind of more difficult problems.
Okay, thank you. And then, okay, yes, yeah, Professor Xia, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Professor Xia Liping from Tongji University, Shanghai. The 6 presentations are very interesting. I have a question for Chad and Matthews. Chad said China and the United States should restore some bilateral mechanism and also innovate some modern bilateral mechanism. So what kind of bilateral mechanism should be restored, and what kind of modern bilateral relations mechanism should be innovated? Thank you very much.
There's really 5 different mechanisms that we have talked with the PLA about before. Only one of them now is in existence. That's the crisis communication or crisis prevention mechanism. I would recommend that you need a risk reduction mechanism, a cooperation mechanism, and a confidence building measure mechanism. The last mechanism is one that the professor highlighted, and I think was noted with kind of some good applause, which was there is a role, I believe, for a track 1.5 private that is connected to track 1 dialogues. In discussions with the PLA before, we've talked about that as what we call a dialogue augmentation mechanism, so another 5th mechanism that would complement normal track one mechanisms. I think if we could start with those 5, you would be able to get after the mechanics of issues. That goes to the other point of then allowing you to discuss principle-based topics in conjunction, but you've got to have both sides. You've got to have the practical side, and you have to have the principle side. And one side falls short, it just doesn't work. But those would be my recommendations for the 5 mechanisms in total. That it's a good place to start.
Yes, you want to?
Yeah. And one thing, there's a unique feature, and I don't think a lot of folks in the West understand this, which is China's use of systems concepts. 系统概念 is an important structural or organizational piece that they use. And if you use mechanisms, the Chinese use that term "jizhi" very specifically because jizhi support broader mechanisms. 制度, 体制, 体系, 系统. And if you have a structure that's built around that kind of that 系统概念, that systems concept, that might be a better way to plug in, and mechanisms just kind of work. So there's a kind of a functional, structural way of being that affords the PLA side, the CPC side, to perhaps absorb a structure. I think that's one of the functional problems of the relationship in the past, is being able to use that more systems architecture to help facilitate what's kind of been hard to coordinate in the past.
Okay, I think Professor Fong wants to say something, right? Am I correct? Yeah. But this question also directing to Matthew. Yeah. You want to say something in response?
Sure, I'll just say very briefly, I think I could tie it to the previous question about Africa. I think Africa is a perfect example where if we can start to break away from seeing that region as yet another arena of competition, another example would be Latin America, where unfortunately a lot of the U.S. Approach to the region is driven both through the lens of migration, but also questions about China's building relationships there. There's an enormous opportunity there in both of these regions for cooperation toward green tech, toward manufacturing, to working with these very young populations if we choose to take it. But the political challenges in both of our countries are formidable. But as I said, it's a political choice we need to make.
Yeah.
OK. 我是来自第三国，所以说这个中美关系这个改进，这个其实没有难度。借中国的这个说法，我们不干涉中美内政，但是呢，我觉得中美关系的这个最主要的第三国帮不了忙。我觉得还是这个两国之间要解决，但是从谁能主导呢？我觉得美国这个需要更加自信。那就这样的话，就跟中国要做事的时候比较有余地。中国崛起的时候，在美国这个愤怒崛起了。我们可以理解这个自二战以来。这个美国所做的贡献，其实国际社会没有那么珍惜，所以我们可以理解美国的这个愤怒。但是美国这个没有发生过的这个联盟转型，所以为什么这个美国不相信他自己80年这个建立起来的这个强大的基础呢？还有为什么那么轻易地放弃他所做的这个那个什么普世价值？为什么要自己去孤立呢？这个我觉得很可惜。国际社会不是不喜欢美国，不喜欢的是他的现在不确定还有不稳定的这个领导。所以如果他真的这个可能这个。下一个总统我们不知道，但是美国还是走这个方向的话，我觉得对自己、美国还有中国还有国际社会一个很大损失，还有一个大错误，还有小贪大失。所以国际趋势变化都全靠在这个 很多部分靠中美关系。中美关系如果可以这个推迟，还有加速化解整个国际这个社会的问题，然后怎么发展做出现或者不出现新冷战。我个人而言，这个当我这个81年的一年分为24个季节，那现在中美这个关系还没到这个冬至，还有立冬，所以两国怎么处理防止国际这个局势是我们这个预防这个国际秩序这个恶化。好，谢谢。
Thank you. Caris, do you have anything to say before we end? Caris? No. Yeah.
I don't. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind, really, the direct answer to the is that I really believe that third countries, middle powers, really have a huge amount of agency, and if we don't like what the U.S. and China are doing, I really don't understand why it's so hard for us to work together. It is difficult to bring countries together, and we've seen that. But if there's motivation, I really believe that we have the ability and the power and the strength to press China and the U.S. into a direction that makes the world safer and better. And it's really a matter of leadership. There has to be leadership among the middle powers. There are some great middle powers, middle powers, and small middle powers, and then a lot of other countries. And I know China works very well in engaging the Global South, in building relations, but they should remember, you see Africa +1. Africa has a lot of strength. What about the African Union being the leader of the Global South? Why not? They really are the Global South. So I think it's a matter of stepping outside the box. We're all very used to U.S.-China rivalry, U.S.-China competition. The U.S. is like this and China is like that, but we can really expand the game to include a different angle that would allow for this gentleman's from Washington's idea. It's about time that the two countries work together to solve some very serious problems. I mean, how is it possible that your competition is more important than hunger and death of so many young people, across Africa? But it is, and that's from your perspective. Same thing with climate change. The speaker from Fiji in the plenary this morning was the only one in that plenary who spoke about climate change and its impact. It's like not even here. And that is the air we breathe. And if anyone understands the air we breathe, it's people in Beijing. And we need to reprioritize. It's very easy to get caught up in our quote-unquote small problems like U.S.-China rivalry and strategic competition and forget that you guys can fight it out while the rest of us choke to death. So I would just say, I know it's difficult and I know it's not the normal way that we do things, but I really think we have to look for maybe some kind of mechanism. I think the committee idea is terrific, and I think, Dawei, your suggestions for the committee are excellent, and I really hope that someone pursues that. But at the same time, maybe we can come up with a mechanism for the rest of us to all get together and figure out how to make things better and press the U.S. and China to accommodate.
Okay, thank you. So I think you all agree with me that this is a very enriched session. We already 5 minutes beyond our schedule, so I have to conclude this discussion. During the whole session, I think I heard a lot about, I think 2 words. One is dialogue, the other is collaboration. It sounds not very fresh, right? We already had a lot of dialogues. We try to collaborate with each other, but I think probably this is the only thing we can do, and also the most enduring, effective way to make the two countries to get along. Fortunately, after last November, after San Francisco summit, I think the two countries are on their way to moving toward the correct direction. But we really need more time. I think this is something I'm not very sure if we can. I hope next year, after election in the U.S., we will continue current efforts for all kinds of dialogue, no matter track 1 or track 2 or track 1.5, and also collaborate on a series of issues. Then gradually, through maybe several years, we will cultivate the habit of cooperation, and we will get used to coexist with each other, and then we can get along. So with that, please join me for the big applause to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. And also thank all the audience for your patience to be here. So thank you very much. This session is concluded. Thank you.
尊敬的各位来宾，离场前请将同传设备置于您的座椅上，谢谢合作。尊敬的各位来宾，离场前请将同传设备置于您的座椅上，谢谢合作。尊敬的各位来宾，离场前请将同传设备置于您的座椅上，谢谢合作。
从酒店走的。来用的这个。